Sale looked at Northern in intense disbelief. I just created it. I just created it. I just created it. The words continued to echo in his mind, impossible and real all at once. I just created it. I just created it. No one, absolutely no one could just create a heroic rank item. And yet, he gazed at Northern, searching for some hint of deception, some sign of exaggeration. There was none. No need for Northern to lie to him. What would be the point? Which meant Sale had to come to terms with an absurd reality. Northern could apparently create a heroic rank item in, 7 minutes? 7 minutes. Northern, observing the shaken sage, narrowed his brows with something that might have been concern. Do you find it to your dissatisfaction? His tone was measured, almost clinical. If you give your reviews about it, I'm sure I can fix it. I tried to use the exact structure of your brown moon bow. Sale hugged the shadow bow to his chest, turning slightly away from Northern like a child protecting a treasure. Lord Northern, are you serious? The words tumbled out breathlessly. My dissatisfaction? The last time I've been this satisfied was when I had moon bow made in Elmish. He pressed the bow closer, marveling at its weight, or rather, the strange absence of weight, as though it existed between shadow and substance. And this, it's even better. I feel like I can see. Northern smiled, pleasant and genuine. Good. For a moment there, I thought I didn't get it right. Yeah, that. He shifted his stance, settling into explanation like it was the most natural thing in the world. My shadow is semi-autonomous, so it has a sense of its own. That's why I asked you to feed it your essence. As long as there's a constant flow between you and the bow, you'll be able to see to a certain degree. He drew a short breath. Moreover, since the bow is semi-autonomous, I added a little property that would affect your arrows and make them choose their own path, the best path to destructive offense. Oblivious to Sale's mouth widening as color drained from his face, Northern continued. That simply means it can turn away and strike somewhere else at the last moment, or even turn around to strike a vulnerable position you didn't think of. His explanation was methodical, almost academic. The bow itself should help you when using it to block attacks. He paused. Are you okay? Why do you look like that? Northern frowned slightly, finally noting the ghostly pallor spreading across Sale's features. Did I mess something up? Sale slowly closed his mouth. He looked at the bow in his hands, this impossible, beautiful weapon, then returned his eyes to Northern. His voice was barely a whisper. It's better than my moon bow. Northern smiled. Pride stirred in his chest, warm and unfamiliar. He hadn't even properly learned to build a bow yet, and here was a sage treating his improvised creation like a relic. The compliment felt satisfying, unexpectedly so. That's good, then. He let the moment settle before adding, but it's all temporary. Since I created it with my shadow, the bow will disappear soon. If my essence depletes or I decide to call back that portion of my shadow. Sale's expression crumbled. He looked dejected, childlike, like someone told the sky would fall tomorrow. Northern shook his head, curling one corner of his lips upward. He really does love his weapon. I'll try making a real bow with these properties later. Well, he said aloud, that should leave you sufficient to take care of a devilish destroyer. Sale nodded immediately, eagerly. Yes, this is more than sufficient. Northern's smile turned subtle. He folded his arms, glancing around the chamber. Dozens of tunnels branching off like veins through stone. The labyrinth pressed in from all sides, dense and disorienting. Of course, only him could clearly see all. There are several tunnels and chambers surrounding us right now. Go straight and turn to your left. It'll lead you to the monster. He met Saela's eyes. This place is a labyrinth. I'm not done sorting out the channels myself, so you'll want to make sure you don't get lost. Also, try not to get swayed. This particular devil seems to be, well, I think you'll ace it. Sale nodded, attentive as a student before a master. Thank you for your belief in me, Lord Northern. I will make sure not to get lost. He threw Northern a wide wave, almost comically enthusiastic, and walked deeper into the tunnel, shadow bow gleaming in his hands. Northern, meanwhile, turned to the wall beside him. Without ceremony, he broke through it with his bare hands, stone crumbling like dried clay. He stepped into another channel and kept walking, leaving behind a northern-shaped hole in the rock. Sail continued for a while, footsteps echoing against stone. When he reached the junction Northern had described, he made sure to turn left, just as instructed. The devilish destroyer was waiting somewhere ahead. The tunnel opened into a cavern. Sail stopped at the threshold, bow raised, arrow of white light already knocked. Combat instinct, the kind earned through years not taught in academies. The chamber stretched wide before him, 50 meters across, maybe more. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like teeth in a stone mouth, each one thick as a man's torso. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, invisible but insistent, echoing, rhythmic, drip, drip, drip. His light arrow pushed back the shadows, carving out a sphere of visibility that moved with him. At the center of that sphere he could see something. Someone. A survivor? But Lord Northern didn't. Sail moved forward, careful to keep his arrow trained ahead even as he approached. The light poured across a pale face, and details crystallized. Pointed ears, fair skin drawn tight over elegant bones. An elf. The elf looked up when Sail's light reached them fully. Relief flooded their features, desperate and raw. Help! The word died. Something moved in the darkness beyond his light. Not walked, not even stalked. Moved, like oil sliding across water, like smoke given weight and hunger. Sail's grip tightened on Northern's shadow bow. The weapon responded immediately. Essence flowed between them, his own energy meeting that semi-autonomous awareness, and suddenly his senses sharpened. He could feel it now, the bow teaching him to see differently, to perceive what eyes alone couldn't catch. The air pressure shifting, the way sound bent around something massive, the cold that came from more than temperature, and what he saw made his breath catch. 8 feet of emaciated horror crouched at the cavern's edge, just beyond his light's reach. Skeletal limbs too long for its frame, joints bending at angles that suggested additional bones human bodies never possessed. What he'd first thought was skin revealed itself as liquid shadow, constantly dripping, constantly evaporating, like it existed between states of matter. No eyes visible in that elongated skull. Yet Sail felt its attention lock onto him with predatory precision. The penumbral stalker tilted its head. Slowly. The movement was wrong. Too smooth, too serpentine for anything with bones. Like a puppet whose strings pulled differently than flesh and joint should allow. Then it smiled. Rows of needle teeth gleamed in the darkness, catching his light and reflecting it back. Like stars in a void. Like promises of pain written in enamel and hunger. The elf whimpered. Sail didn't lower his bow. Of course it kept bait alive. This. His mind raced through Northern's explanation. Semi-autonomous arrows. Ability to choose optimal paths. The bow itself could help block attacks. The stalker moved. Fast. Sail had fought destroyers before, but he had never fought a devilish destroyer alone. And certainly never in conditions this disadvantageous. The monster's jaw unhinged, wider than physically possible, and exhaled. Black mist poured from its mouth like oil smoke, thick and unnatural. It spread across the ground, creeping toward his feet with deliberate slowness. Too deliberate, too controlled. Where it touched his light arrow's glow, the illumination hissed. A sound like water on hot iron, and died. Sail fired immediately. The light arrow screamed across the chamber, guided by perfect accuracy and Northern's shadow bow's autonomous targeting. The shot was clean, the trajectory flawless. It should have struck center mass. The arrow passed through empty darkness. The stalker had already moved. The black mist spread faster now, flooding across the cavern floor like spilled ink. Sail manifested a wind platform beneath his feet and launched himself upward, escaping the creeping darkness. 3 more platforms materialized in quick succession, invisible steps of condensed air and moonlight forming his aerial highway. Create space. Maintain distance advantage. He knocked another arrow mid-leap, fired, knocked, fired again. 4 shots in 2 seconds, each one targeting a different position where the monster might be. Each arrow adjusted mid-flight, seeking, hunting. All 4 passed through shadow. The mist reached the dead elf against the wall. Where it touched the corpse, the body seemed to diminish, not decay, something worse, as if the darkness were drinking it. Sail landed on a platform 20 feet up, bow drawn, breathing controlled. His stern demeanor crystallized, emotion locked away behind the facade he'd perfected over years of training. This required methodology. System. The creature was fast, yes, but everything had patterns. Everything could be read. Find the pattern. Exploit the opening. He activated one of his talent abilities. 5 invisible lunar sigils manifesting around his position. Pale marks hanging in the air like frozen starlight. The marks would bind to whatever he hit first, priority targets for focused fire. Each one represented a stacking advantage. The darkness spread across the ceiling now, flowing like liquid shadow. His remaining light sources flickered, dimmed, then died. Absolute blackness swallowed the cavern. Sail's heart hammered once, twice. The old panic rising, that familiar sensation of walls closing in. The same helplessness he'd felt against the Kageyama scion who'd beaten him in the narrow dark passageway, who had made him feel slow, predictable, outmatched. No, not again. Not here. He fed more essence into the shadow bow, the weapon drinking his power like water into dry earth. The bow pulsed in response, its semi-autonomous senses bleeding into his awareness. Not sight exactly, more like knowing. He could feel the shape of things, air currents displaced by movement, the texture of space where something solid existed. The bow whispered positions, distances, trajectories into his mind like a second set of instincts. There, behind and above, descending. He fired into the darkness behind him without turning, trusting the feedback completely. The arrow adjusted mid-flight and curved upward, targeting something Sail's eyes couldn't see but his bow absolutely could. A wet thunk, the sound of a broadhead finding meat. The stalker shrieked. The sound was wrong. Too high-pitched for something that size, layered with multiple tones like 3 voices screaming at once. It reverberated off the stone walls, disorienting, maddening. The echo seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The ability Sail activated locked onto the beast immediately. 1 sigil embedded, invisible, permanent until death. The stalker would take 25% increased damage from all his attacks now. First mark. For more to stack. He manifested 10 more wind platforms across the chamber's airspace, building his 3-dimensional network. If he couldn't see, he'd control the space through positioning. Force the monster to come at him through predictable angles, funnel its approach vectors. Something dripped in the darkness below. Thick, heavy, blood maybe, or something worse. Then that smell hit him. Rot and wet earth and old meat. The stench of carrion left too long in standing water. Close. Too close. Move. Sail dove forward, abandoning his platform. Wind caught him mid-fall, guided by instinct and the heritage of a lineage built on aerial supremacy. A new platform materialized under his boots just as something massive displaced the air where he'd been standing. He felt the rush of it, the pressure wave of enormous mass moving fast. The shadow bow thrummed a warning directly into his mind. Behind. Above. Diving attack. He twisted, fired blind into the darkness above and behind. The arrow screamed upward, curved impossibly right, struck something solid with the meaty impact of a perfect hit. Another shriek, this one frustrated, pained. Second constellation mark. Embedded. The slow effect was stacking now. 10% reduced movement speed on the stalker. Not much, but every advantage mattered when fighting above your weight class. Good. Keep it methodical. Stack the marks. Reduce its advantage incrementally. Sail landed on another platform, already repositioning before his boots fully touched down. His breathing stayed controlled despite the darkness pressing in from all sides like a physical weight. The bow's senses fed him information in fragments. Displacement here, movement there, the faint sound of claws scraping stone in a circular pattern. Stalking. He fired into that sound. The arrow adjusted trajectory 3 times mid-flight before impact, compensating for target movement with machine precision. Thunk. Third mark. The debuff was building. 15% slower now. The stalker's breathing changed. No longer confident, no longer treating this as easy prey. Annoyed, maybe. The breathing pattern shifted, circular now, orbiting his position. Testing his defenses. Looking for openings. Patient. It's learning. The realization chilled him more than the darkness. More than the smell. More than the weight of fighting alone. Catastrophic danger level meant monsters weren't just fast and dangerous anymore. They became tactical. Devilish monsters became intelligent, shrewd and cunning, capable of adapting mid-fight, capable of strategy. Abysmal became menace, neutral evil, sometimes even lawful evil. Every exchange with the penumbral stalker was teaching it something about his capabilities, his patterns, his limitations, and he was fighting in complete darkness. Against something built for it. The dripping sounds multiplied. No longer one source, but dozens. Liquid shadow falling from the stalker's body as it moved through the chamber. Each droplet evaporating before hitting stone. Sail fired toward the densest cluster of sounds. The arrow split mid-flight and struck 2 positions simultaneously. One hit solid flesh. The other passed through empty air. Afterimage. The real attack came from his left. No sound. No warning except the bow's frantic pulse against his palm. The weapon itself screaming danger through the bond between artifact and wielder. Sail manifested a white light platform sideways as a shield. The barrier materialized just in time. Something massive slammed into it with enough force to crack the compressed air. The platform shattered, fragments of solidified light dissolving like glass. But it held long enough for Sail to roll away, firing blind as he moved. The arrow curved back mid-flight and struck the stalker's retreating form. 4th mark embedded. 20% slow now. The creature's movements would be noticeably hindered, each step a fraction delayed, each strike arriving just late enough to matter. But Sail's essence was draining. Each arrow cost minimal energy alone, but he'd fired dozens. The platforms added up. The constant repositioning, the maintaining of his network, it accumulated like water through cupped hands. Can't sustain this pace much longer. Need to end this efficiently. And they hadn't even reached the real fight yet. The stalker's breathing stopped. Complete silence. Sail froze on his platform, bow raised, every sense straining. The shadow bow's awareness extended outward, searching, but found nothing. The beast had gone completely still. No heartbeat, no breath, no movement. Like it had simply ceased to exist. Seconds passed. 5, 10. Water dripped somewhere far away. Then the darkness changed. It wasn't just the absence of light anymore. It became present. Alive. Sail felt it pressing against his skin like icy water, seeping through his clothes, trying to find purchase in the spaces between threads. The temperature dropped. His breath misted. He couldn't see it, but felt the moisture freeze on his lips. The shadow bow pulsed urgently. What is? Arg! Sail stifled an intense groan as pain suddenly exploded across his left arm. Sharp, burning, like teeth made of frozen needles digging through flesh. He looked down, couldn't see anything, but felt it. His own shadow, the one cast by nothing, because there was no light. It had bitten him. Small chunks of darkness peeling away flesh like acid, exposing nerve endings to air that felt suddenly razor-sharp. My own shadow. It's using my own shadow against me. He manifested a light arrow immediately, pressing it against his arm like a torch. The shadows recoiled, hissing like steam escaping pressure, but the arrow dimmed rapidly. The lightless domain was too strong. Within 3 seconds, his light arrow died completely, snuffed like a candle in a hurricane. The pain resumed. Blood ran hot down his forearm. He felt it, sticky and warm, the only heat in this frozen darkness. Light doesn't work. Can't maintain it long enough. Need another solution. Think. Sail fired 3 arrows in rapid succession. Pure instinct, no target, and used the recoil to launch himself toward where he remembered the cavern wall being. His shoulder hit stone hard enough to bruise. He pressed his back against it, limiting attack angles. Basic tactics. Control what you can. The darkness continued eating at his exposed skin. Arms, neck, face. Anywhere shadow touched. The pain was methodical, systematic, like being flayed by invisible knives working in careful strips. His mind raced through options with methodical precision despite the pain. Option 1. Lunar Aria. 300 arrows of light flooding the chamber. Would it overpower the lightless domain? He considered. Rejected. No. The mist would snuff each arrow individually before they could concentrate. Waste of essence. And if I overtax myself now? Sail thought about his flaw. If he pushed past his limits, Moonless Night would trigger, complete essence lockout when he needed power most. He couldn't afford to be reckless. This monster was cunning, adaptive. He needed to use his wits, not brute force. Option 2. Light Fortress. Concentrate all remaining essence into one massive illumination that couldn't be snuffed. Maybe, but it would drain me completely. Leave nothing for the descent or escape. The third option arrived unexpectedly. Stop fighting the darkness. Accept it. Work with it, not against it. His fingers tightened on Northern's shadow bow. The weapon itself was darkness. Shadow given form and purpose. It thrived in this environment, fed by the very absence of light that was killing him. The bow didn't struggle against the lightless domain. It existed in harmony with it. Lord Northern said it was semi-autonomous, that it would choose the best path to destructive offense. He'd been treating it like his own bow, forcing light into darkness, imposing his will. What if he stopped? Sail took a breath, released control. He fed the bow every bit of essence he could spare. Not light essence, just raw power, and whispered aloud, "Show me how you hunt." The shadow bow woke. Sail felt it immediately, the weapon's intelligence surging forward, no longer limited by his conscious direction. It didn't need light to see, didn't need his eyes or senses. The bow existed in shadow. Was shadow. This darkness wasn't an obstacle. It was home. His hands moved without thought, drawing and firing. The arrow launched. Not light anymore, but concentrated shadow darker than the surrounding blackness. It curved impossibly through the air, guided by senses Sail didn't possess, seeing through the void like a predator born to it. Thunk. The stalker shrieked. 5th constellation mark. Embedded. Maximum slow. 25% reduced movement. Maximum damage boost. 25% increased damage taken. The creature's invincibility had shattered. Now it was just meat that could be killed. The bow was already drawing again. Sail's hands puppeteered by the weapon's autonomous will. Another arrow. Then another. Each one shadow stuff given form. Each one seeing what he couldn't. His role had changed. He wasn't the archer anymore. He was the instrument. The stalker moved. Sail felt it through the bow's awareness, trying to become intangible, to slip between states where damage couldn't reach. Too slow. The marks were hindering it. 25% might not sound like much, but in combat, that fraction of delay was the difference between untouchable and vulnerable. 3 arrows struck simultaneously. Different angles, different targets, all weak points the bow identified without human input. Joints where bone met cartilage. The soft hollow beneath the skull. The place where the heart, if it had one, would pulse. The beast materialized involuntarily, solidity forced back into its form by sheer damage. Sail couldn't see it, but he felt the bow's satisfaction through their link. Found you. Lunar Aria. The ability name left his lips before conscious thought caught up. Yes, it was risky. Yes, his flaw loomed close. But the shadow bow had created an opening too perfect to waste. The stalker pinned, visible, vulnerable. Sometimes efficiency meant seizing the moment. Essence poured from Sail's core like a flood breaching a dam. His heritage abilities responded instinctively. Wind gathering, platforms multiplying across the chamber's airspace in a cascade of solidified air. Not 10 platforms now, 20, 30. An entire aerial city forming in the darkness, each one a staging point for death. And the arrows, 300 points of shadow materialized around him, each one darker than the void itself. They didn't glow, didn't announce themselves with light. Instead, they drank in what little ambient essence remained, hungry voids shaped like weapons. Northern's design had adapted, the supreme shadow responding to the environment, becoming the perfection of its element rather than fighting against it. Masterwork, Sail thought with genuine appreciation. He designed it to learn and get better. The arrows began to orbit, slow at first, then faster. Complex geometric patterns Sail could feel but not see. Spiral galaxies of concentrated death, music made manifest. Each arrow singing its own note in a symphony of destruction. The stalker shrieked again. Fear now, not pain, and tried to flee. Too late. Falling stars. 300 arrows of darkness fell. Not randomly, not scattered. Each one guided by the Shadow Bow's semi-autonomous targeting, each one striking weak points simultaneously. Joints, tendons, the places where skull met spine, where ribs protected organs, where arterial blood flowed closest to surface. The bow knew anatomy the way master craftsmen knew their art. Intimately, completely, without hesitation. The stalker tried to phase. The marks made it too slow. The arrows caught it mid-transformation, forcing solidity, pinning reality back into flesh that wanted desperately to escape. The beast collapsed. Impact shook the cavern floor. Silence. Sail waited, bow raised, breathing hard. His essence pool was dangerously low, maybe 15% remaining, right at the threshold of moonless night. One more major technique and he'd trigger the flaw essence lockout just when he might need to run. Please be dead. Please. The darkness began to recede. Slowly, lightless domain fading with its caster's death. The unnatural void bleeding back into ordinary shadow. Gray light filtered back into the cavern. Enough to see shapes again. Edges. The rough outline of stone walls that had been invisible moments before. Sail looked down. The penumbral stalker lay broken across the cavern floor, 300 shadow arrows embedded in its flesh like a porcupine's quills. Already dissolving, matter returning to the void it came from. Smoke and memory. Congratulations, you have slain a devilish destroyer. Penumbral stalker, you have gained an item. He'd won. But Sail didn't move from his position against the wall. Didn't celebrate. His hands trembled slightly. Adrenaline crash, essence depletion, relief washing through him in waves that felt almost like weakness. And something else. Understanding. I stopped fighting the darkness. For over 35 years, he'd built his entire combat style around light. Moonlight arrows, luminous platforms, visibility and precision. Light was safety. Light was control. Light was everything he needed to protect the people he loved. It had served him well, kept him alive, kept others alive. But Northern's Shadow Bow had shown him something different. Darkness wasn't the enemy. Fighting against it was. The moment he'd released control, accepted the shadow, worked with it instead of against it, that's when victory became possible. Not through force, through adaptation, through understanding that sometimes the answer wasn't to impose your will, but to trust the tools master craftsmen had made. Lord Northern knew. He designed it this way intentionally. Sail looked at the bow in his hands. Already fading, Northern's essence commitment probably reaching its limit. Soon it would vanish completely, called back to its master. He smiled. Genuinely. No stern mask, no calculated expression. Just honest gratitude for a lesson he hadn't expected to learn. Thank you, he whispered to the weapon. The bow pulsed once. Almost like acknowledgement. Almost like respect given back to the student who'd finally understood. Then it dissolved into shadow smoke, returning to its master. Northern walked through the tunnels with purpose. He had a mental map of the entire network, courtesy of his spatial awareness abilities, and knew exactly where to go, which made the traditional route seem wasteful. So instead of navigating the complicated labyrinth like some lost adventurer, he simply broke through the walls and connected point to point. The most optimal path was a straight line, after all. Plus, the rock walls crumbled so easily under his strength that it barely qualified as an obstacle. He'd initially tried it as an efficiency measure. But over time, something unexpected happened. It became therapeutic. Fun, even. There was something satisfying about the way stone gave way beneath his fist. The clean crack of rock splitting apart, the shower of debris marking his passage. Stress relief with a side of efficiency. I should market this. From time to time, he checked on sales progress. Supreme Shadow, no matter how distant, was still his. He could simply channel Eye of the Shadow through the shadow bow and see exactly what the Arrow Sage was seeing. The man had encountered a survivor. Northern had considered warning him about the person. Something felt off, but he held back. Just as Sale met the stranger, the creature in the darkness struck, killing the survivor instantly. Sale, to his credit, proved quick on his feet and retreated without hesitation. Good instincts. Northern averted his focus from the battle, making a mental promise not to intervene unless Sale's life was actually in danger. Drifters needed to grow stronger, and coddling them wouldn't help. Besides, Northern had his own destination to reach. He'd enjoy the walk. After several more minutes of therapeutic wall breaking, he finally emerged into the cavern expanse. The sight made him pause. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone chandeliers. Their pointed tips reflected perfectly in the surface of a small lake that dominated the center of the wide chamber. Northern had emerged from a tunnel that opened onto an upper ledge, a natural platform that jutted out into empty air before stopping mid-level. It looked almost deliberate, like some ancient architect had designed an addressing platform specifically to overlook the stalactites, the lake, and the scattered rock formations below. Northern exhaled slowly, gazing down at the underground ocean with a small smile. How undemure! You are using Whispering Gale, Wind Embrace. He stepped off the edge. The wind caught him immediately, and he flew with the grace of a falling leaf, descending in a gentle spiral before landing softly on the surface of the lake. Or rather, above it. A closer inspection would reveal he wasn't actually standing on the water at all. There was a hair's breadth of space between his feet and the surface, so small as to be nearly invisible. The subtle ripples spreading across the lake weren't from his landing either. Northern trusted his control implicitly. However, Northern knew what was causing it. He knew since he stepped into the expanse. He lowered himself, dropping into a crouch and leaning down toward the water's surface. When he spoke, his voice carried an almost eerie calm. How long are you planning to stay down there? He paused, as if genuinely curious. If I decide to camp here for the next hour, are you going to keep hiding under the water until you eventually drown yourself to death? His tone was conversational, casual. He shook his head slowly. I've never seen an elf stoop so low. Literally. The water erupted. Someone burst through the surface in a spray of droplets, gasping and struggling for air. They flailed briefly, treading water, then froze when they saw Northern crouching on the surface of the lake like it was solid ground. Their expression was priceless. The elf had blonde hair plastered to his head and striking blue eyes. His jaw was angular, sharp, and there was a hard veteran look in his gaze, the kind that came from surviving things that should have killed him. Northern grabbed him by the throat before he could speak. The elf's eyes widened as Northern stood smoothly, lifting him clear out of the water with one hand. No effort, no strain, just a casual display of overwhelming strength. Northern's gaze went cold. Dangerous. Who are you? The elf gripped Northern's wrist with both hands, muscles straining as he tried to pry those iron fingers away from his throat. He pulled, twisted, fought with everything he had. Northern merely stood there, expression blank. Felt like trying to move a mountain. Like the hand around his neck had turned to stone, utterly immovable. Cute effort, though. The elf's face reddened. Desperation crept into his eyes. Then he screamed, voice strained and hoarse. Now! An arrow spiraled through the air with lethal intent. Northern, still staring blankly at the elf, casually caught it behind his back with his free hand. The projectile slapped into his palm and stopped dead, its momentum killed instantly. Is this supposed to be your? 2 more arrows came, then a 4th. Northern didn't even look. He shifted the first arrow in his grip, using his fingers to anchor the 2nd and 3rd arrivals, catching each one between his knuckles with just enough force to neutralize their killing speed. For arrows now bristled from his hand like a macabre bouquet. His gaze darkened. In one smooth motion, he held all 4 arrows together and drove them into the elf's right flank. Arg! The scream was raw, visceral. Blood bloomed across wet fabric, rich crimson mixing with lake water. Northern's voice cut through the echo like a blade. The next place I'll be striking is his throat. He angled the bloodied arrows toward the elf's neck, his tone flat and utterly serious. If you don't step out now, your friend dies. The arrows dripped steadily, each drop hitting the water's surface with a soft plink. There was silence. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows, bow in one hand, both arms raised in surrender. He stepped carefully into the dim light filtering through the cavern. Northern could see him perfectly, of course. The darkness had never been an obstacle. He'd been tracking both of them since before he'd even landed on the water. Amateur hour. A small smile curled on his lips as he turned his attention to the elf still dangling from his grip, blood trickling down his flank. Well, well, what a surprise. His voice carried a note of dry amusement. Sir Alistran, and what, exactly, are you doing so far from home? Northern looked completely unsurprised, mainly because he wasn't. He'd suspected their identities the moment he entered the cavern expanse. The ambush had been clumsy, desperate, not the work of actual threats, just someone he knew being the usual suspicious idiot. Alistran's face, however, flickered with genuine shock as he took a closer look at Northern's features. Recognition dawned, followed immediately by disbelief. Rian! His arms dropped slightly, exasperation flooding his voice. Ah, come on! Alistran exhaled with relief. Then his eyes widened. Northern had struck the man. The realization landed a beat too late. He looked at Northern sternly. Northern hadn't dropped the elf yet. His grip remained firm around the man's throat, his feet dangling uselessly over the dark water. Rian, what are you doing? Northern's head shifted slightly, his gaze cool and measuring. Matter of fact, I should be asking you that. What are you doing? Why are you so far from home? Alistran exhaled and scratched the back of his neck, closing his eyes for a moment. Casual. Too casual. Don't tell me you're suspecting me right now? Tell me why I shouldn't. Northern's voice was flat. I'm following my mother's trail, and I just happened to meet you and this elf. He paused, letting the implication hang. For all I know, you could be in cahoots with the followers of Vitten. You've always been suspicious, after all. And coincidences like this don't exist. Ouch, Rian. But that's understandable. Alistran held up his hands. First, drop that man and let me tend to him. He's one of the attackers from the war at Drywall who tried to steal the Edrian core. Right now, he was leading me to a certain, esteemed individual in Stuart, someone who's currently in this world. This whole thing is merely a coincidence. Northern narrowed his eyes. Sure it is. Or you could be lying. His grip didn't loosen. What's the Edrian core? Alistran fell silent. He hesitated, shifting his weight. I don't think I'm supposed to tell you that. Northern glanced at him coldly, then brought his attention back to the elf still dangling in his grip. The man's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. Fine. Where is my mother? What do you two have to do with the battle that happened in the woods? He examined the elf's body with clinical detachment. Aside from the arrow wound he'd inflicted, still bleeding sluggishly, the elf bore no other injuries. No defensive wounds, no signs of a prolonged fight. Aside from the point I stabbed you, you don't seem injured. Northern's eyes flicked back to Alistran. So were you the ones who injured someone? Did you injure my mother? Alistran's face twisted with genuine surprise, or a very good imitation of it. Stars. No. What? The words tumbled out. Injure your mother? An elven royalty? No one would dare. So what are you doing here? Please, Rian. Alistran's voice took on an edge of desperation. That's the only lead I have on that man. Northern tightened his grip on the elf's throat. The elf made a strangled sound, fingers scrabbling weakly at Northern's wrist. Pointless, really. Sounds to me like you need to start talking. Quickly. He tilted his head. What man? Alistran stood there for a moment, clearly weighing his options. None of them good, probably. He finally exhaled. They call him the Peacemaker. The words came faster now. Think of him as an elder counselor in a kingdom. But he's not just that, he's a sword for the powerful, and a high-ranking member among the followers of Vitten. Alistran's expression darkened. The Peacemaker has orchestrated hundreds of bloodline mergings, trying to combine probabilities and bring Vitten back. Your mother was the last piece of his puzzle. Northern's jaw tightened. If anyone knows where she is, it has to be the Peacemaker. And right now, Alistran gestured at the choking elf. You're killing my only lead to him. Northern was silent for a moment. Hundreds of bloodlines. The last piece. His mother reduced to a puzzle piece in some madman's game. He released his grip. The elf fell into the water with a heavy splash, disappearing beneath the dark surface. Northern shifted, reality bending around him, and materialized directly in front of Alistran. The older man staggered back, eyes wide with shock. If I find out any of your information is misleading, Northern's voice dropped, cold and precise. I will kill you, and I will make sure you suffer quite sufficiently while I do. Alistran gulped, but he held Northern's gaze, straight, serious, unflinching despite the fear. I'm not lying to you. His voice was steady. I'd be rather stupid to do so. He would be. Alistran had seen Northern's strength firsthand, had taken a front-row seat to his explosive growth during the Rift Raid with Lieutenant Dante. The man knew better than to test him. Northern moved aside, watching as Alistran rushed past him toward the water. The scholar dropped to his knees at the edge, reaching down to haul the sputtering elf back to the surface. If this is a lie, he won't get a second chance to explain. Northern folded his arms and waited. Alistran bent down beside the elf, water pooling around his knees. His hands moved with practiced precision, his soul weave talent manifesting as luminous strands that stitched the sword wound closed. The bleeding stopped within moments, the ragged flesh knitting together with a faint hum of essence. Afterwards, they approached Northern together. The elf looked decidedly worse for wear, pale, waterlogged, and sporting a fresh scar across his ribs. Alistran looked nervous. Northern glanced around the cavern, taking in the scattered debris and claw marks scoring the stone walls. When his gaze returned to them, he asked, "How did you two end up here anyway?" "We encountered some complications." Alistran paused mid-sentence as Northern's dark gaze settled on him. Heavy. He cleared his throat and restructured his words. "I meant to say we got this far using the underground channel." He spoke faster now, clearly aware of Northern's limited patience. "We met some followers of Vitten at the point where we came out of the tunnel. Since we couldn't afford them knowing about the tunnel's location, we had to kill them." Northern's expression didn't change, but for some reason they prioritized running. Alistran frowned, clearly still puzzled by it. "Now that you mention it, I think their priority might have been your mother. They ran, we chased, and ended up following them to this place." He gestured vaguely at the cavern around them. "Before we encountered a really dangerous monster and had to lure it to a favorable position to fight it. Hence how we found this place." Northern looked at Alistran keenly. The timeline lined up barely. The followers fleeing toward the woods, the battle, his mother's trail going cold. So the dead elf wasn't with them. It was a statement, not a question. Another piece that didn't quite fit. Alistran sighed, scratching the back of his head. The nervous gesture again. And he laughed. A weak, shameless sound. Since you're here anyways, you could help us defeat the monster, right? Northern gave him a demeaning look. It's dead already. Alistran's laugh continued for a beat, then stopped abruptly. His expression shifted from nervous amusement to disbelief. Wait, what? He stared at Northern. That monster is a devilish destroyer. There's no way. His voice trailed off. The cavern suddenly felt very quiet. It's dead already, Northern repeated, his tone flat, matter of fact, as if he were commenting on the weather. My subordinate killed it. Alistran's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Your subordinate. The word came out strangled. Northern could practically see the man's mind racing, trying to reconcile the impossibility of what he'd just heard. A devilish destroyer, the kind that required teams of veteran drifters to bring down, killed by someone Northern considered a subordinate. Northern said nothing. Sometimes silence communicated more than words ever could. The elf beside Alistran had gone very still. His earlier bravado completely evaporated. Right? Alistran's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat again. Of course. Your subordinate. Naturally. So what is your lead to finding them now? Northern gave Alistran a cold look. There was still some skepticism as to whether to trust the man. But he wasn't too worried about anything. Not like they can actually threaten me. Alistran exhaled, sitting on the ground. The monster killed them. I don't know where to go from here. But if the Peacemaker is here, he will certainly come for the Edrian core. I think it might be safe to return to South Drywall. Northern looked at him and chuckled. So let me get this straight, he said. You came all the way here to find this Peacemaker person. You met his underlings, engaged them in a battle. They ran. They got caught and ate by a monster. Now you have no lead forward, so you want to return to South Drywall and wait for this Peacemaker person to come to you. He laughed again. Either you two are the most stupid people I've ever seen, or you just think I'm that easy to fool. Alistran laughed lightly. Why wow? Before he could complete his words, Northern was standing in front of him. He casually drove a punch into his gut while standing straight, but Alistran folded like a piece of paper and flew away at an amazing speed. The impact rippled through the air, a sharp crack of displaced wind. He crashed into the wall behind, breaking a bunch of stones. Dust billowed outward in a choking cloud. Northern didn't even watch him land. I think you somehow are underestimating me because you think I can't attack you. His voice was flat. I'll have you know that I'm not held down by familiarity, respect, and things like that. In the face of what truly matters to me, I will do only what is necessary. His tone dropped lower. Alistran, where is my mother? I'm running out of patience for games. The blonde-haired elf finally looked at Northern and spoke, coughing slightly as he pulled himself upright. The encounter with the monster was unexpected. The Peacemaker, he is very high on the nose. By now, he most likely knows about me. If he does, he knows I failed, and he will certainly be thinking of retrieving it for himself. Everything with that man is only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time before you meet him at your doorstep. Northern released a wry smile. He's welcome to my doorstep. I couldn't care less. The elf frowned. You might be strong, but the Peacemaker, I don't know how to explain him to you. He's a walking, charming, kind and disastrous man able to pull people in a strange manner and make a resource out of them. He is strong, fiercely strong, and he will make you question your definition of strength. Northern gave the elf a disgusted look. Did I ask for a character profile? He turned to Alistran. No one is going anywhere until I find my mother. Before, it was all casual. It was not like he expected Shin or his mother to be in danger in a place that was supposed to be home to his father. Northern did not suspect anything at all until he entered the Kageyama clan. Now, he was beginning to get impatient. He kept trying to calm himself, telling himself that he was going to find his mother. Find her alive. Stand up. We're leaving here. His command was sharp and final. It left no room for debate. The elf looked at Alistran, who recovered from Northern's blow with an intense groan. Blood painted his jaw red, dripping down to stain his collar. He nodded at the elf that it was okay, and the two of them followed Northern as he began to retrace his steps through the labyrinthine channels of the cave. They spent a few minutes walking. Alistran would open his mouth in awe any time he saw Northern break through the walls with so much ease, punching through them like he was punching through fragile wood. And the walls gave way easily too, like they had just been waiting for that punch. Their stone loosened and shattered on the ground far too easily. Alistran was conflicted. At some point he had also tried to do it, but he scratched his knuckles and just managed to shake some small stones off. Northern had looked at him and shook his head. What was he even expecting? They continued for quite a while. Then finally they saw light at the end of the tunnel and came out. It was night, the sky insinuated so. However, a great golden mist rose in front of them like a wall, casting a radiance that had deceived them into thinking it was day while they were inside the cave. The glow was soft but pervasive, saturating everything with warm, honeyed light. The ground was green and lush. It was evidence of a healthy water system at the very least, so Northern suspected that there was going to be a really large river somewhere nearby. That was when he noticed. My spatial awareness is cut short? It was like all his senses, through their diversities, were bouncing off a wall and riding back at him. He frowned and looked up at the mist. Ahoy! Subject is unidentifiable. I'm going to need more time. Take all the time you need. Meanwhile, Alistran and the elf looked up. The elf spoke, awed by what he was seeing. I never knew this rogue world had such beauty. Alistran looked at him and scoffed. The rising fall is just one of the 9 miracles we have in our world. You should check out the floating ruins. Northern, hearing that at that moment, also realized. He had heard of the rising fall, one of the wonders of the world. A place that was home to the most peaceful tribe in the world. Northern, growing up, always thought that it was merely myth. People treated it as such and claimed that there never could be peaceful people in this kind of world. However, Northern was standing at the gateway into the tribe. He exhaled. This can't be good. Nothing about peaceful people hiding behind impenetrable barriers screams, everything is fine. Strange. Northern had not sensed Sail inside the cave at all. And now that he was outside, he expected to immediately sense the guy. While they were in the cave, it was like he had entered something, gone too far for his senses to reach. Northern hadn't thought much of overextending at the time because too much information would flood in, and there were many other things demanding his attention. But now that he was standing in front of the golden mist, he knew why. What is the rising fall? Alistran shrugged. A waterfall that rises instead of falling. The elf looked at him in distrust. That can't be possible. Alistran laughed shortly. What do you think is causing the golden mist? The collision between the upward flow and the surrounding downward atmospheric pressure is creating dense turbulence zones. That turbulence continuously shreds droplets into fine vapor, forming a permanent mist barrier around the waterfall. The elf stared at the golden mist draping down like colossal curtains, a mix of white and gold that seemed to move with its own impossible logic. Northern interrupted just as the elf was about to reply. We should press forward. He stepped forward, paused, and glanced back at them. Alistran cleared his throat and followed. So did the elf. They walked across the green field as they neared the mist wall. Parted before them, opening like curtains drawn by invisible hands. It wasn't completely clear, but visibility sort of extended. Northern could see through the haze up to maybe 20 meters ahead. More problematic was the complete absence of shadows. Can't use Eye of the Shadow like this. He could summon Supreme Shadow, but Northern didn't know how the mist was going to react to that. Bringing out a semi-autonomous shadow entity into whatever this place was seemed like asking for trouble. There was a popular myth about the rising fall that violence, even in an unhatched state, made no difference. Only the peaceful could enter into the rising fall and reach the tribesmen. He wanted to be careful. These were a people whose history ran as far back as Riemgard itself. The only difference was they were very small in number, isolated, almost forgotten. Maybe his mother was here. Maybe the Nebulous Lord too. Nebulous Lord? No, I doubt it. Nebulous Lord wasn't necessarily violent, but there was a paper-thin difference in how people always reacted to monsters. First instinct was to attack. Always. The tribesmen would be no different. A hissing sound intensified as they pressed forward. But it wasn't harsh. It was more like being inside a massive seashell, that oceanic white noise, layered and constant. Northern's mind filtered through the layers almost automatically. He heard the upward rushing of water, droplets colliding with each other in strange musical tones. Something that might have been distant feminine singing, even the sound of his own breathing. Everything merged together to create one singular sound that filled the space around them. After a few more minutes, they entered into a pocket of perfect clarity. The mist here became so fine it was invisible, and Northern could now see everything. The water rose from beyond the ground, straight up into the sky, almost entering the clouds themselves. Northern neared it, gently placed a finger into the stream. That part parted. He could feel the upward flow as it hit his hand, a constant pressure pushing against his skin. Cool. Persistent. It's actually rising. Physics really doesn't matter here, do they? He looked down and saw that the water was still coming from deep below, rising endlessly into the sky like some kind of liquid pillar connecting Earth to heaven. Northern was still looking up when he squinted, then turned to Alistron. His eyes narrowed. No Alistron, not even the elf. Both of them were gone. When did? Barely a second later, golden light fell down like stars and surrounded Northern almost immediately. They had 4 panels of golden translucent wings like dragonfly wings, graceful but dense with muscle beneath their soft appearance. Each of them had the same amber reflective eyes, like light shining through honey, and held small round bucklers strapped to their forearms. One of them stepped toward Northern. She had short golden hair that reached just to the start of her neck. White and gold markings traced along her forehead in a V-line above her brows. 2 horizontal lines ran down her cheeks to her jaw, and a diagonal scar cut over her nose from the corner of her left eye. Visitor. Her voice was measured, formal. We kindly implore you to go back. Valithia is closed for now. Northern exhaled and placed his hands behind his back, looking straight into the girl's amber eyes. Pupils absent, just endless reflected light staring back at him. I can't turn back. If I'm correct, a friend of mine is somewhere in your city. He paused. And if Lady Luck decides to smile upon me as she hasn't before, then my mother is there too. The lady looked at him, barely suppressing slight disgust at his casual tone. You have quite distinctive features. I'm sure your mother would be easily recognized. She straightened. We have no such person with us. Now scram. Ahem. Kindly leave, please. Northern raised one eyebrow at her, having caught that slip. So much for peaceful tribesmen. I'm sorry. He looked at her flatly. I have to get into the city. Northern said it blankly, his expression neutral. The girl stood her ground, those amber eyes reflecting him back at himself. A white-haired stranger with blue eyes asking for entry where he clearly wasn't wanted. I'm sorry. She crossed her arms. You can't. Northern looked at her still, unmoving. They're said to be pacifists. I'm unsure what could happen if I attack first. He studied the bucklers, the formation they'd taken around him. But this is also pretty annoying. He couldn't waste time with negotiations. Not when his mother might actually be close. Northern wore a fake smile and directed it at the lady's face. Then he casually looked up at the sky. You came from up there. Is that the way? The lady gave him another look of disgust, this one sharper than before. Huh? What are you? She froze mid-speech as Northern casually bent his knees and took off, shooting toward the sky like a released arrow. What? She staggered back in flustered confusion, wings flaring instinctively. The others reacted similarly, genuinely shocked at the fact that he could fly at all, let alone at that speed. Not expecting that, were you? Their wings fluttered in rapid succession, and they chased him immediately. golden forms streaking upward through the mist. They pursued relentlessly after Northern, wings beating hard against the sudden resistance. But to their surprise, their speed didn't even come close. It was like the wind itself had turned against them, each wing beat suddenly requiring twice the power. Northern stared at the surface of the water as he scaled upward, rising with absurd speed. Too easy. He glanced down. They were pursuing him, certainly, but at the same time, they didn't look particularly bothered. No urgency. No desperation. Something is off. He twisted mid-flight and took a sharp fall, diving back down toward them. All of them startled. The lady at their forefront, the one who'd approached him earlier, frowned. The kind of frown that said, "This can't be good." Northern shot toward them and suddenly curved at the last moment, angling into the rising waterfall. "Ha! This bastard!" The lady's voice cracked with frustration, and all of them beat their wings frantically, immediately giving chase. Northern found himself in a narrow cave lit by golden stars embedded in the stone. He had no idea how exactly they were generated, and frankly didn't care. Either way, the passage was refreshingly straight, and Northern could already see light at the far end. He increased his speed and blitzed through the cavern, stone walls blurring past. Then he burst out into a wide and overflowing world of white light. Northern stopped midair, straightened, and looked around. At that moment, the other ladies emerged from the passageway behind him, but he paid them no attention. He just stood there, suspended, taking in the sight of the city. The place was built amongst drifting clouds, mushroom dome structures with circular apertures, floating gardens suspended on nothing, wooden bridges connecting impossible heights. Everything was built with curves, no sharp edges, as if violence itself could not take geometric form here. An enormous river wound through the world of clouds, drifting in the opposite direction of the clouds themselves. On the river, boats made of solidified cloud carried people who flowed against the current, fishing and farming from the floating platforms. The surface of the river was decorated with market stalls, gardens, workshops, entire livelihoods built on drifting water. Each dome structure connected to the river by those impossible bridges, some passing over it, others diving beneath. Northern stared in awe. The place, it looked like heaven. "Hey, you cockhead!" His awed state shattered. He turned back to the lady and her subordinates, who had now surrounded him in a loose circle. "We will escort you back outside, you retarded birdbrain." The subordinates shifted uncomfortably with each curse that spilled from her mouth. Northern could tell she was the odd one out among them. Her companions seemed almost pained by her language. The one closest to her leaned in and whispered, "Lady Judgment, the Keeper warned us against curse words. Aren't they an act of violence?" "Well, he started it." She glared at Northern, as if her profanity was somehow his fault. Meanwhile, more people began to gather around them, floating in from various directions. They wore the same flowing apparel and shared the same general appearance. Golden hair, golden wings. Though their hair varied in length and style, and their faces differed, of course. These new arrivals even looked older, more authoritative. Great. Reinforcements. Amongst them was a lady fully cloaked in golden armor, with a winged helmet that made her look somewhat like a Valkyrie. She was the only one holding a spear of light instead of a buckler. As she approached, the entire sky went dead silent. The people on the river stared upward. From the domes, faces appeared at windows, craning to see what was happening above. Northern watched as the armored woman drifted first to the lady who'd been cursing. Without a word, she gave the girl a loud knock on the head. The girl recoiled, clutching her skull. "Ow wow!" The armored lady said nothing. She simply turned to Northern, her presence commanding absolute attention. "Child of prophecy, although this was not the way you were supposed to reach us, but I believe something is wrong. The constellations are moving. This must be the reason for your presence this early." Northern looked at her with a frown. Child of prophecy? Constellations. For some reason, this whole thing felt feverish, dreamlike. Plus that particular phrase, He felt like he'd heard it before but couldn't quickly place how or when. Another prophecy. Wonderful. You're in search of the elven woman and the creature of the void, are you not? Northern raised a brow suspiciously. Yes, and a few other people. A man with ashen hair, two other guys, one elven, the other with dark, rough hair and slightly weathered skin. The woman paused, looking sideways. One of her entourage flew closer, whispering into her ear. Afterward, she turned back to Northern. Sale of the white strings, you mean? He is here. Her expression shifted slightly, became more grave. The other two, however, only those with pure hearts can pass through the golden mist. They may be lost in the mist, trying to find their way. Until their hearts are clear, they'll never see the path. Northern exhaled slowly. Pure hearts. What does that even mean? So, my mother and the nebulous lord are here, along with my friend. She nodded, and her smile carried the gentle warmth of morning sunlight. Indeed, child. Will you kindly follow me? I shall take you to meet her. Northern studied the armored woman for a moment longer. Then he shifted his gaze, surveying the surrounding guards before returning to her. I see. His expression was blank, revealing nothing. All right then, lead the way. The lady smiled and turned, her spear of light catching the ambient glow. The entire group drifted forward with her, forming a loose escort around Northern. The air hung silent as they flew. Peace seemed to permeate the atmosphere itself, and the people below, on their cloud boats at their windows, wouldn't stop staring. Their gazes tracked the procession across the sky, even as Northern and his escort approached the silhouette of a massive dome structure rising from the clouds ahead. Northern was escorted towards the giant dome, towering over the rest. He entered the structure, eyes scanning the interior. Even inside, there was no ground floor. The river still streamed through, a constant flow of water that divided the space. The Volithians could dive beneath the surface for long hours, doing whatever it was they needed to do in those submerged depths. And there were lift systems rising from below the river, platforms ascending into the air, carrying people up to the upper floors. From there, solid ground finally existed. Interesting engineering, Northern thought as he studied the mechanism. Northern followed the woman. She landed gracefully on a floating platform, so did he. He observed other people around them, all riding the platforms patiently to the next floor of the domes. His inquisitive expression must have been obvious, because he didn't even need to voice his questions. The woman looked at him and smiled softly. There are two races of the Volithia tribesmen. She gestured toward Judgment, whose wings were still unfurled and motionless, unlike the others who had folded theirs back to merge into tattoos against their skin. The Seraphi and the Arethamine. We're the Seraphi. She glanced down at the figures diving into the water below. They're the Arethamine, built for the depths of the river while we soar the skies above it. The platforms were created by both races and can be used as a form of convenience. Northern noted her words. He observed for a few moments, then looked down at the swimmers below. Built for different elements. A complete division of function. Does that mean there are underwater channels for the Seraphi to reach the depths? The platform continued rising. They reached a new floor but were still ascending toward the upper level. Northern could now see people moving around the upper floor. The space was built into different sections, blocked off by brick walls, with inhabitants walking in and out of various chambers. The woman smiled and nodded. Of course there is. It is only natural. She paused, that small smile still gracing her features, then added, but the Seraphi have limited time they can spend underwater, just as the Arethamine have limited time they can spend in the air. We were created for the water and for the air. As much as we create means of coexistence, we must not substitute one for the other. Northern nodded in understanding. A symbiotic society with hard biological limits. No wonder they've developed such elaborate systems. I see. It's reasonable, and it forms the structural foundation of your society. He paused, piecing together the implications. I think, to an extent, I can see why your people don't step outside. Wrinkles formed in the corners of the woman's eyes as she turned to Northern. "Oh? Why would that be?" Northern shrugged and spoke with a calculated tone. "What you've built for yourself here, both you and it, would be abused. The world outside has been structured to take too much of everything. Whether it's the people or the environment it has grown to be, it's ruined. Somewhat." He paused. "They'll take this and you and ruin it too." Northern looked around. "This place looks like paradise." The lady laughed. The sound was gentle, almost fragile, and almost cutting. "Indeed, you speak the truth. But heaven." She shook her head. "If this looks like paradise to you, then all we have managed to achieve is a pitiful imitation." Northern looked at her, expression indifferent. Then he looked around again. "She's not wrong. But still." The platform finally reached new ground and stopped. The lady gestured toward him. "Come, child. Your mother awaits." She turned and walked forward. Northern's heart beat faster and faster, but he kept his face clean and calm. Almost there. He followed her through the cold hallways. Soon they branched into a staircase that led them to a wide hall with decorative floors and high chandeliers that looked like scattered droplets of water frozen midair. There were many people, all with golden hair and ivory-smooth skin, walking around and attending to different tasks. At the edge of the hall, Northern spotted a woman talking with two ladies, one with a buzz cut, the other's hair short. The one with the buzz cut had sharp, slightly angled eyes that were naturally narrowed to slits, while the other's eyes were fairly large. The woman speaking to them had blonde hair, golden eyes, and olive skin that gleamed beneath the reflective light of the hall. Although her face wasn't smooth, rather scathed, with a bandage wrapped around one of her arms, her beauty was undiluted. In fact, she seemed to shine particularly brightest among them all. As Northern entered the hall and looked at the woman, she had also turned to look at him. She stopped mid-sentence, her gaze locked on him. Then she just ran. Through the hall, limping and almost falling, but she ran. Northern smiled somberly and ran to meet her. "Mom!" As she was about to reach him, she stumbled and nearly fell. But his speed increased for a brief moment and he caught her in his arms, pulling her into a tight embrace as they both fell to their knees. Aisha held him tightly, buried her face into his shoulder, and sobbed. Northern closed his eyes for a moment, patting her back, his heart finally finding relief. She pulled herself from him, gripping his face gently and sobbing with a smile on her tear-streaked face, muttering through the emotion. "Your father, that fool. Shin is fine, Mom. He's okay." Northern's voice was steady, reassuring. "What about Silver?" She froze for a moment, surprised and genuinely happy at the news. Relief washed visibly across her features. Then she brought herself to respond to Northern. "Your sister. Thanks to him, she's well protected. She's with him at the moment." Northern narrowed his eyes, doubting who his mother's words were referring to. "It can't be. Him? Who?" Aisha looked at him, smiling through the remnants of her tears. "Your friend. The monster." She paused. "He called himself Lord." Northern's mouth hung half open. "Ah, nebulous Lord." A strange relief settled over him, mixed with something like amusement. "Silver is with Nebulous Lord." Interesting. That made sense in a way. If anyone could protect his sister in this chaotic world, it would be that absurd monstrosity. The thought should have worried him more than it did. But somehow it didn't. Northern relished the warmth of his mother's hug once more before she eventually pulled away and led him to where Nebulous Lord waited. They crossed the hall, climbed a narrow stairway, and arrived at a room on the upper floor. When Northern entered, whatever he'd been expecting to see, if he'd even been expecting anything, wasn't what greeted him. After everything that happened with the Void, he'd just been looking forward to seeing Nebulous Lord again. The summon had always carried the most profound connection to the Void, the deepest understanding of that dark power. Northern had thought maybe that connection would help him sort through the mess in his head, the questions that wouldn't stop churning. But when he stepped into the room, he wasn't even sure the thing before him could be called a monster anymore. Nebulous Lord sat in a lotus position, the baby resting on his thighs. He was playing with her, making soft sounds and laughing. Northern stood there, rooted to the spot. That is Nebulous Lord. The creature Northern currently stared at had a figure carved from dusk and storm. Brown olive skin stretched over a lean, battle-forged frame, the planes and angles made sharper by the dark gleam of obsidian eyes. Black hair spilled over his face in unruly waves, broken only by the imposing sweep of two ridged horns curving back from his temples like a crown of shadow. He wore a loose golden robe, clearly provided by the Velithians, given the fine embroidery along the hem. The fabric draped naturally over his shoulders, settling like it belonged there. Nebulous Lord looked disturbingly human. As Northern stepped deeper into the room, the summon raised his head to meet his gaze and froze. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Nebulous Lord carefully cradled the baby against his chest, stood with fluid grace, and dropped to both knees. He raised the child toward Northern like an offering. "Master," he said, his voice smooth and measured, achingly human. "I protected your sister." Northern's breath caught. He killed someone. There was only one way a void summon could evolve this far, could gain speech and form like this. Nebulous Lord had devoured a soul. A human soul, or close enough. Northern found himself more awed than concerned by that fact. His void summon had killed an elf. If Nebulous Lord had done it, Northern knew there had to be a reason. The creature followed his will, understood his priorities. He just needed to hear it confirmed. Needed to know the killing had been necessary, not casual. He stepped forward and gently took Silver from the summon's outstretched arms. The little girl giggled, utterly delighted, completely unaware she'd just been held by something that could unmake reality. Northern looked down at her, studying her face. She'd inherited pieces of both parents. Raven black hair like Shin's, golden eyes like their mother's. The combination was striking even on an infant. But what caught Northern's attention were her ears. They were beginning to develop their shape, the tips just slightly pointed. Half-elf. He glanced at his mother, who stood near the doorway watching them with that soft expression mothers seem to reserve for moments like this. "I need to know everything about what's been going on," Northern said quietly. "Mother, can you please excuse me for a while?" Aisha smiled, warm and understanding. "Of course. You should spend time with your sister." She slipped out of the room without another word, leaving Northern alone with Nebulous Lord and the baby. Silence settled between them, thick and expectant. Northern moved to the bed and sat down, shifting Silver's weight in his arms until she was comfortable. Nebulous Lord turned toward him but remained kneeling, head slightly bowed in that posture of deference that looked bizarre now that he wore a human-like face. "What happened?" Northern asked. "How did you end up like this?" Nebulous Lord smiled. "Hia." Northern jerked back slightly. "Don't smile. It's creepy. Give me time to adjust to this." Aside from finding it hard to reimagine Nebulous Lord as anything remotely normal, the summon actually was creepy. He hadn't properly learned how to smile yet, so when he tried, it looked like a creature carved from living darkness was brandishing white teeth with absolutely no hostility whatsoever. Comical and unsettling in equal measure. Like watching a shadow try to convince you it's friendly. Nebulous Lord tilted his head down slightly, looking sullen. Northern regretted his words immediately and sighed. What happened? The void creature's lightless eyes glittered with something that definitely wasn't light. More like the absence of it, somehow expressing emotion anyway. "Thank you, Master. It was fun." Nebulous Lord's voice carried genuine enthusiasm. "I killed many people. Well, killing the people was not fun. In utmost sincerity, I do not relish the gore of death. It stinks, and it really clings to my body, and I think I hate dirt." He paused, as if checking his own thoughts for accuracy, then nodded affirmatively at Northern. "Yes, I think I do." Northern, slightly taken aback by his summon's bizarre confession, couldn't help but laugh. "A void monster that hates getting dirty. Oh, ah, so what about it was enjoyable?" Nebulous Lord grinned, maliciously, widely, and somehow innocently all at once. The combination shouldn't have been possible, but there it was. I spent time with Mother, and she treated me with kindness. At first she was scared of me, but I had protected her, so it looked like she had no choice. But I never wanted her to be scared of me. It was saddening. So I had to understand my own abilities on my own. He shifted forward slightly, enthusiasm building. Because I couldn't reach you, I couldn't just feed off your memories. Because of that, I was put in a position to learn. His grin widened. Learning was fun. I killed a dark elf and got all his memories after I ate him. I got his body too. And then learning a lot of fun stuff became easier. He gestured animatedly, almost childlike in his excitement. And I wanted to destroy the pursuers, the steward elves, but Mother insisted we find shelter first. For Silver's sake. Nebulous Lord shook his head, genuine confusion crossing his features. I really could never understand why she wanted shelter when we could just persevere and kill them all. Humans are very incomprehensible. Northern nodded slowly. Tell me about it. I know, right? Sometimes I think about it too. Then, without planning it, without either of them meaning to, both spoke at the exact same time in perfect chorus. But then it does make them interesting. Northern froze. Silence stretched between them, thick and strange. He stared at Nebulous Lord. Nebulous Lord stared back at Northern, those lightless eyes unblinking. Neither moved. The moment hung there, suspended and surreal. Master and summon connected by some shared understanding neither had voiced before. Silver giggled, oblivious to the weight of the moment, delighted by sounds only babies could hear. Northern stared at Nebulous Lord for a long moment, and for some reason, one he couldn't quite name. He felt certain the two of them were going to have far more in common than strictly necessary. Wonderful. Just what I needed. Of course, Nebulous Lord looked like he'd turn out vastly different. The kind who'd kill with genuine, earnest enthusiasm, perhaps even a smile. But then again, Northern had to inquire within himself, probe at that uncomfortable question lurking in the back of his mind. Was he absolutely sure he wasn't like that? From omniform to countless other aspects, Nebulous Lord had taken from him more than any other summon ever had. The creature had practically turned him into a template, a model of existence to study and dissect. Used him as a rod of learning, absorbing everything Northern was and could be. Now all of it was showing. This is terrifying. He looked at Silver, who was throwing her tiny hand toward him, fingers grasping at air, maybe wishing she could grab his face, pull him closer. The simple gesture made something warm flicker in his chest. Then he looked back at Nebulous Lord, standing there with that proud, knowing expression. So, Northern began, keeping his tone casual. Were you able to find out anything about the people chasing Mother? Nebulous Lord rubbed his chin thoughtfully, the gesture almost comically human. Well, there's not much to know from this one's brain. He's a small fry. He paused, then brightened. But I do know that they think if Mother gets impregnated by the present Elven King, who is Elderwood, and at the same time her father, she'll most likely give birth to Vitten. Oh, Vitten is some sort of elven origin they worshipped. According to what I read from this one's memory, one could call him the origination of the elven race in its entirety. He was the first elf and a partner of the origin of the moon. Northern cringed immediately. No, absolutely not. Say what now? Nebulous Lord nodded, apparently oblivious to Northern's discomfort. He was impregnated and gave birth to the elven race. They also call him the World Tree. I think the whole endeavor of this is to revive the World Tree and return the glory of the elves. Northern was still cringing. Mother impregnated by her own father to birth a deity. What kind of twisted? Isn't this Vitten person a man? Nebulous Lord shook his head, almost pitying Northern's confusion. I don't think it works like that, Master. He paused. Am I a man? Northern thought about it for a while, studying the dark-skinned elf standing before him. Technically. Wrong, Master. Nebulous Lord replied with unmistakable smugness. I'm genderless. So was Witten, so are the origins. They're called the protean gender. Although I am genderless, neither a man nor a woman, Witten and the origins can be either whenever they want to. Biology doesn't really apply to them, so Witten could mother a child while presenting as male. Northern understood better now, the cosmic horror of it clicking into place. But still, he couldn't help but cringe at the mental image. There are some things a person simply shouldn't have to visualize. So, we could say Witten was the elves' world tree? He paused, then added flatly, the moon came down and fucked the world tree to give birth to the elves? Nebulous Lord nodded energetically, like a student proud of his teacher's comprehension. Yes, indeed, master. The first elves were twins, one with dark skin, one with bright skin. They both married each other and spread the dark elven race and the wood elven race. Northern was impressed despite himself. This is the most I've come to know about elven history, and I'm not sure I wanted to know this much. He looked at Nebulous Lord with new curiosity. And how do you know all of this? Nebulous Lord tapped his head with a proud expression, as if the answer should be obvious. Here. Northern silently observed him, the dark skin, the elven features, before he eventually spoke. Of all the elves in that soldier's memory, why choose a dark-skinned one? Nebulous Lord's expression shifted, eyes narrowing with suspicious scrutiny. Master, have you heard of racism? His tone carried an edge of reproach. It's a thing common amongst the elves. The dark-skinned elves were ostracized from society and killed because of their skin color. That's what you're doing right now, master. Will you look at this brat calling me a racist? Northern exhaled slowly, keeping his expression neutral. I'm not being racist. I just called you out on it because I don't presume you encountered a dark elf in that soldier's memories. I heard they were rather few and had been banished from the elven lands. Nebulous Lord folded his arms and nodded, apparently satisfied. Indeed, master. Indeed. He glanced down at himself, studying his own dark hands. I have no idea, honestly. It just turned out like this when I tried to choose the form. Northern nodded, inspecting Nebulous Lord again with a more analytical eye. Perhaps Omniform made him adapt to his old dark-skinned form. Yes, that must be it. Omniform is such a racist, not me. What? There was no response, even though just now it had felt like Aoi was about to say something. Interrupt with some sarcastic observation, probably. Nothing? Really? Still nothing. Northern brought his focus back to Nebulous Lord, looking at the summon with a mixture of delight and pride. He'd created Nebulous Lord from scratch, after all. Willed him into existence. It had been meant to stall Galahad back in Lewengard, a desperate gambit in a desperate moment. But apparently, the void creature had far outlived his initial purpose and become something much more. Northern couldn't help but wonder for a moment. Was this his own doggedness driving the evolution? Or was it simply the void's nature? Did the void itself push its creations toward greater heights? Or was he somehow responsible? I should prepare him to face Chaos Prince and eat him. Nebulous Lord seems like the one person actually capable of killing that bastard. All right then. Northern looked at his sister, making funny faces at her. His heart leaped with genuine joy as she laughed back at him, the sound bright and innocent in this strange, tense moment. Nebulous Lord looked over enviously, as if he wanted to do it too. Join in the simple pleasure of making a child laugh. But he quickly straightened his expression as Northern returned his gaze to him. So, Northern's voice turned businesslike again. What is this place? What's the situation here? So, Northern's voice turned businesslike again. What is this place? What's the situation here? Nebulous Lord scratched the middle of his head, roughing his already roughened dark hair more. He looked like he was searching for the answers there, as if they might be hidden somewhere in his scalp. Well, I'm not too clear on the situation myself. I think they spoke more with Mother. He paused, frowning. The woman though, the old one with the spear, she's really difficult to figure out. She smiles even to me when she knows I'm not human. That kind of smile should be reserved for humans. Shouldn't it? Nebulous Lord looked genuinely baffled by the nature of the said woman. Northern exhaled. Of course he doesn't know anything useful. All right, so, what about Abyss Tyrant? Nebulous Lord looked at Northern. Oh, that one. Northern looked back at him. That one. He narrowed his eyes at Nebulous Lord. Have you been harboring animosity towards Abyss Tyrant all the while? Nebulous Lord shook like he'd just got caught with contraband. Animal? Animus? City? What is that? Totally got no idea. Northern's eyes were still narrowed at him for a few more seconds. Then he straightened his expression and exhaled. No point pushing that particular issue right now. Since the void was taken, I've not been able to reach him. It was the same thing with you. Northern studied him carefully, watching for any reaction. How do you feel generally? Nebulous Lord tilted his head left and right, considering. No difference. It was sharp and painful when I got disconnected from you. But I still feel a lot connected to the void. Northern's gaze sharpened. You do. Nebulous Lord nodded his head rigorously. This new fact drove Northern into a deep thinking moment. If Nebulous Lord could still feel the void, then certainly it would confirm that he was more suited to hold it than Chaos Prince. This would mean that Northern could find Chaos Prince's other vestiges and feed them to Nebulous Lord. Would it not make Chaos Prince have access to his body? Then again, Nebulous Lord had Omniform too, and the way his worked was that anything he ate, he could become. So maybe it could be a hack to converting all Chaos Prince's vestiges fully to his own power. The logic was sound. Risky but sound. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Northern raised his head. Nebulous Lord naturally stood up to unlock it. When he did, there was a young lady with short golden hair and sharp golden eyes, a vicious scar cutting across her face. Northern recognized her immediately. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. At the same time, she looked like she could bite anything that gave her an excuse. Mother Anike is looking for you. Northern sighed and stood up. And who may that be? Judgment looked at Northern, barely trying to hide the disdain on her face. She was the kind of girl whose expression always betrayed her before her words could. Every thought written plain as day. Follow me. Northern did so, but she stopped immediately, turning back to him. Unhand the child. Where we are heading is bad for a child. Northern hesitated, then placed Silver in Nebulous Lord's hands. She'll be safer here anyway. He followed Judgment. She took him up. They climbed the stairs, twirling stairs that almost looked like a pathway to heaven. They had to walk over 1,000 steps before they eventually reached the topmost floor of the dome, hidden in the depth of the clouds. The place was like a garden on a roof, enjoying fresh wind and the company of the clouds. Northern walked amidst them, entering and coming out with wet clothes clinging to his skin. The moisture seeped through fabric, cold and oddly refreshing. He set eyes on the lady he'd seen earlier. She held a watering jug molded with clean white porcelain and was watering plants that shimmered with different beautiful colors. Pink, blue, red, violet, all with green bases. She turned back and glanced at Northern as he approached. Then she invited him with a kind smile. Child of prophecy, thank you for honoring my call. Northern sighed and sat on a yard bench in the garden. Here we go with the prophecy nonsense. You call me that. What does it mean? What do the constellations have to do with this place too? She continued to water the plants for about a minute, then straightened as she finished. Judgment moved closer to her and collected the porcelain jug, retreating from the garden without a word. Anike slowly settled herself beside Northern, her spear of light following her like it had a mind of its own. She looked at the drifting clouds with their mix of golden and butter hues, expression distant. Aren't they beautiful? Northern looked at the clouds. Don't you get tired of admiring their beauty? The clouds, this garden, everything. Don't you get tired of it all? Seek more. Anike chuckled lightly. More. She exhaled gently. What a dangerous word. Northern gave her an unhappy expression. It isn't always. He returned his gaze to the clouds, watching them drift past the garden's edge. My pursuit for more. While it has cost me so much, it has gained me so much. Ultimately, I am here today because of my insatiable appetite for more. Despite my stupidity. Anaik looked at Northern strangely. There was a small smile leaving her face, replaced by a tinge of pity. You used deprecating words on yourself, child of prophecy. Northern chuckled. I've not exactly been the best one around. He paused. And what's it with the child of prophecy thing? Really? Anaik looked down, silent. She took her hand and made an arc on her forehead, then did the same to Northern. As she did, Northern's eyes widened. There was something he'd forgotten, something buried deep. The action immediately prompted him to remember. The gesture, the movement, the weight of it. He felt a very serious sense of déjà vu wash over him. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Anaik with a small frown. The Triad sisters. There was a small sad smile on Anaik's face. You remember after all. The memory was blurry, but it was certainly there. He remembered quite well. He wasn't exactly a baby when it happened. These were the very few fragments that reminded him he'd had a life before now. Before everything. And that was why he could remember such a forgettable detail about his rebirth. The situation surrounding his mother. The three sisters. That particular thing that had killed them. Now that he thought about it, there was no way Shin and Aisha wouldn't have discovered that body and known something was wrong. Northern's brows furrowed even more. They know. The realization settled like lead in his gut. Their reluctance to show him to the world made sense now. Teaching him to be harmful and dangerous? No. Instead, they'd taught him only in the way of love. They'd basically raised him to be a good person and left him defenseless against the obvious dangers of the world. It was like they were desperately trying to remedy something, to counteract whatever they'd found that night. A subtle frown settled on Northern's brows as he looked at Anaik with cold suspicion. How do you know about them? Anaik exhaled. She looked away at the clouds, but then brought her face back to Northern. The Triad sisters are the saintesses of Elfok. Have you heard of the King constellations? Northern furrowed his brows. King constellations? Anaik smiled. Ancient astrology is not commonplace in the world today. We Velithians and the Realm Guardians are perhaps part of the very few that have a refined and undiluted understanding of the history, especially surrounding the astrology and the beginning of our world. Northern's gaze on her intensified. He considered saying some things, then considered not saying them. But alas, he opened his mouth. History of our world? You mean how it was created by the origins as a food system to feed their souls with ours? Anaik looked confused. Northern, seeing the look on her face, explained further. It shouldn't be news that I just battled a notorious origin. He told me about what the world here is, its purpose. It's basically known as the lesser fragment of the Echo Realm, while the underworld is the greater fragment. Anaik was silent for a few seconds. Her face was serious, and it seemed like she was genuinely considering the things he was saying. She sighed. Well, they aren't wrong, but I believe it is more complicated than that. No matter how powerful, origins are merely the beginning of concepts. Constellations come before that beginning. They date as far back as gods themselves. Northern, at that moment, shifted and looked at Anaik. You know about gods? She nodded. I do. Northern kept his gaze on her, still suspicious. Not many people know about the existence of gods. She nodded. Yes, not many people speak directly with Elfok, first King Astron. Northern frowned. Aren't the constellations supposed to be dead? Anaik then burst out laughing. She laughed for a while, gently covering her mouth with the back of her hand, before giving Northern an amused look. There are many variations of answers that are postulated to satisfy unanswered questions or to put an end to ceaseless and pointless seeking. Are the constellations dead? They do say dead men tell no tale, except the constellations are not men, and actually can tell tales. Does that make them dead, though? She looked genuinely inquisitive. I guess such a statement wouldn't apply to them since they aren't men either way. Northern just stared, dumbfounded and silently pissed off by her sense of humor. She really needs to work on it. So are the constellations dead or alive? Anike smiled, treating Northern's seriousness with a senile joke. Are they? I do wonder. Or maybe she just couldn't answer the question herself. Northern's gaze was serious. So, what is the point of all of this? Maybe I should go back to the initial question. How do you know the Triad sisters? What's your connection with them and what happened that night? Why do you keep calling me child of prophecy? He paused and hesitated, but a new light reflected in his eyes. And lastly, you know who I am, don't you? She tilted her head. A Realm Guardian and an Asgardian? Northern frowned in confusion. Asgardian. She nodded with a childlike smile on her delicate but weathered face. Did your mother, your real mother, not tell you about her tribe? Holders of the magic eyes. Northern froze in place. So much information was coming all at once that he wanted to beg the woman to stop and run him through all of this patiently. One thing at a time. Please. He looked at her. Holders of the magic eyes, you say? That is what other people call them because they each have unique optic prowess. It set them apart in the whole of the northern continent. She observed Northern's expression and then realized. It seems you've never met your tribe. Northern almost crashed out within his own mind. I've never even heard of them. Hell. No, I haven't. He responded calmly, though his jaw tightened slightly. Anike looked away for a moment. It seems you are rather not in the know regarding many things. Northern shrugged tiredly. To be honest, it's kind of frustrating. Anike looked at him with a small smile. It is merely because you have not met the right people. Not many people know about these things. Northern frowned. What things? That the constellations are alive and are trapped in the beginning. That what we regard as the voice of Ul is not at all Ul's voice, but she had merely hacked the constellation's will, adulterated their intention, and left them helpless in a prison that they do not deserve to be. She said it all with a casual tone, as if she wasn't just dropping world lore that Northern had never in his past 16 years heard of. Casual. She's being casual about this. Probably nobody ever has. Anike continued, her voice still maddeningly even. Well, there are also other truths surrounding the creation of the lesser fragment and the fact that your father is trying to fix the problem the Origins created. But that certainly is not my place to tell. Northern stared at her. My father? Now she brings up my father. The information kept piling on, each revelation more staggering than the last, and she delivered them like she was talking about her day. Northern sat there in silence for a few moments, while Anike, with a small smile, appreciated the clouds. What exactly do you mean? My father is trying to fix the problem the Origins created. Anike shook her head, that same small smile playing on her lips. It's not my place to tell, child. Northern exhaled. Of course it isn't. What then are you willing to tell me? I can tell you about your maternal grandmother's tribe. I can tell you about the constellations and the reason why you came to Trarel. At that moment, Northern's gaze darkened. You know. Anike gave him that small smile, innocent, unassuming. No. What? That I. Shush. She placed a finger over her lips and shut Northern up. Then she looked towards the sky. At this point, orange hue was already slipping through from somewhere far, spilling into the clouds and coloring them with fire. The night is nigh. We should prepare for a long night. Northern narrowed his eyes. Prepare? What's there to prepare for? Anike stood up, her white and gold garb unfolding like petals. Northern was still looking at her with slight confusion. What am I missing here? As she rose, Judgment and 3 other girls approached and bowed. Then she was assisted in standing, though Northern suspected the assistance was more ceremonial than necessary. The light spear wiggled slightly and danced into her hands. She turned to Northern and said with a soft smile, We shall have dinner at the hall where you met your mother earlier. Afterwards, let us prepare for the long night. Anike bowed lightly to Northern and turned away. Northern remained seated, wondering what he was missing. He turned it over in his mind, but couldn't figure it out. He just sat there thinking about the little, yet somehow much that she had said. At least she promised to tell me about my mother's tribe after tonight, whatever that meant. Northern stood up and followed through the entrance where they'd come from. He walked down to the large, wide hall. As he entered, he could hear someone calling his name. Lord Northern. Lord Northern. Northern was slightly embarrassed, but he also knew the only person who could be calling him that was Sale. Why does he insist on that ridiculous title? Northern smiled calmly as the arrow sage navigated his way through the crowd of Seraphi and Aretha Mine, finally reaching Northern with a happy look on his face. Lord Northern, I knew you'd get here. Your belief in me is magnifying, Sir Sale. Sale waved dismissively. There's no need for politeness. Let's drop it. Northern gave him a serious look. Tell that to yourself. Sale didn't need to be told what Northern was thinking to figure it out. He laughed, a bit sheepish. They're two different things, really? Northern turned, walking forward through the crowd. Is that so? How did you manage to find this place? Sale followed. After following the path you told me to, with a bit of a struggle, I defeated them and eventually continued down the line. I saw light at the end of the tunnel, if I'm to put it in a nutshell. Northern and Sale made their way through the crowd. The hall was being set up, a long table dominating the middle. People moved to and fro, carrying plates and all different kinds of delicacies to and from the table. Northern finally reached his mother, Sale flanking him. Aisha was busy arranging the plates in front, receiving them from the servers and dishing out the meal where necessary. Sumptuous soup spilled into bowls in her hands, with delicate greens and vibrant fruits on the same plate, all coming together to create an astonishing meal. She paused and handed the bowl in her hand to the Seraphi next to her, before turning to Northern with a happy smile. Northern, she said, her voice warm in a way that made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. He managed a small smile. You look busy. Busy is good. Busy means family is home. Her eyes glistened, and Northern felt his throat constrict slightly. Not this. Anything but this. He cleared his throat. Need help? Aisha laughed. A sound like wind chimes, light and genuine. From you? The boy who once tried to cook and nearly burned down half the kitchen. Northern's eyebrow twitched. I was 7, and that was Shin's fault for distracting me. Excuses, excuses. She turned back to the bowls, but her smile remained warm and teasing. But yes, you can help. Just don't touch the soup. I was 7, he thought again, a bit indignant. Sale stood awkwardly to the side, clearly unsure whether to stay or leave. Northern caught his expression and fought back a smirk. Sale, make yourself useful. Start moving those plates to the far end. Yes, yes, Northern. For the next several minutes, they worked in companionable silence. Northern found himself watching his mother's hands. Graceful, precise. The same hands that had braided his hair when he was small, that had held him when nightmares came. The memory sat in his chest like a stone. I won't ask. Not tonight. There were questions burning in his mind, about his father, about the elves, about why she'd been missing, about everything. But looking at her now, humming softly as she arranged the table, he found he didn't want to ruin this moment. Some truths could wait. You've grown strong, Aisha said suddenly, not looking at him. I can see it in the way you move. In your eyes. Northern paused, a plate in his hands. I had to. I know. Her voice was soft, tinged with something that might have been regret. Even though we did everything in our power to make sure you never have to face such a life. Northern set the plate down carefully, his movements deliberate. You did what you thought was right. And you? Do you think it was right? He considered the question, turning it over in his mind. The old him, the one from Earth and the Dark Continent, weak and used and discarded, would have said no. Would have raged against the secrets, the isolation, the years of not knowing. But that Northern was dead. I think, he said slowly, that I'm here now. That's what matters. Aisha turned to him fully then, and there were tears in her amber eyes, eyes that matched his own. She reached up and cupped his face with both hands, and Northern found himself looking down at her, at this woman who'd haunted his memories for years. "My beautiful boy, my Lael." "Oh no. Mom. Shush. Let me have this." She pulled him down and kissed his forehead, and Northern found himself frozen, unable to protest, unable to pull away. The warmth of it spread through him like sunlight through water, gentle, overwhelming, unwanted and desperately needed all at once. When she released him, he straightened quickly, clearing his throat and absolutely not noticing the wetness in his own eyes. Completely dry, perfectly fine. Sale was suddenly very interested in arranging plates at the far end of the table, his back turned with what might have been tactical discretion. Northern looked around the area of the table they were arranging, surveying the precise placement of silverware and plates. "Right? Well, the table looks adequate." Aisha laughed through her tears. "Still can't accept affection gracefully, I see. I accept it fine. I just don't know what to do with my face." "Your face is perfect," Northern groaned. "Please stop." The dinner was a peculiar affair. The hall had filled with both Seraphi and Aretha Mine, their golden wings catching the fading light through the windows. The two groups mingled with practiced ease, centuries of cohabitation, Northern supposed. The food was strange, delicious but strange. Fish that glowed faintly blue on the plate, luminescence pulsing in rhythm with something Northern couldn't quite identify. Fruits that tasted like sunlight felt warm and bright and impossible to describe. Bread that seemed to float slightly before you bit into it, defying gravity with the casual indifference of essence-infused matter. Everything infused with essence from the mist, from the ascending waters, from this impossible place. Northern sat between his mother and Sale, with Anike at the head of the table on a slightly elevated seat. Clearly ceremonial, though she ate with the same small, serene smile as everyone else. The position of honor, he noted. The symbolic center of authority, wielded with typical Seraphi understatement. Judgment sat nearby, silent and looking mean as always. Northern was beginning to suspect that was just the woman's face. There were identical twins that sat across from him, moving in perfect synchronization as they ate, even chewing at the same time. It was hypnotic and slightly disturbing. Are they doing that on purpose, or is it automatic? Northern found himself wondering. Some kind of twin bond, or just theatrical performance? Further down, a woman with bright orange hair was laughing too loudly at something, drawing annoyed looks from her neighbors. Nessa, someone had called her. She seemed determined to fill every silence with noise, as if the quiet itself was offensive. The conversation flowed around him, light, pleasant, carefully avoiding any topic of substance. Northern contributed minimally, content to observe and eat the admittedly excellent food. He'd learned long ago that people revealed more when you said less. Right now, everyone at this table was performing, playing roles. The question was why. Aisha kept glancing at him, as if making sure he was real, that he wouldn't vanish. It was simultaneously touching and uncomfortable. "Lord Northern," Sale whispered, leaning close. "Is it just me, or is everyone being deliberately cheerful?" Northern had noticed the same thing. The laughter was too bright, the smiles too practiced. Underneath the pleasant veneer, there was tension. The kind that came before battles, before executions, before moments when everything changed. "They're preparing for something." "The long night," Northern murmured back. Anike mentioned it. No one's explained what it actually means. Sale frowned. "Should we be concerned?" Before Northern could answer, Anike stood. The hall fell silent immediately. Not the gradual quiet of conversations winding down, but the instant, complete silence of soldiers snapping to attention. Northern's eyes narrowed. "Interesting. The sun has set," she said simply, her soft voice somehow carrying to every corner of the room. "The veil will soon shift." Northern felt the temperature drop. Around the hall, every Seraphi's expression changed. The warmth drained from their faces like water from a broken vessel, replaced by something harder, colder, more ancient. Even his mother's smile faded. "What?" Northern started. "The mist keeps us safe during the day," Aisha interrupted quietly, her hand finding his under the table. Her grip was tight, too tight, her fingers digging into his palm with the kind of pressure that spoke of fear. "It shows hostile visitors their own violence. It turns them away. I know that. But at night," her voice dropped to barely a whisper, "at night, the mist doesn't show them their violence." Northern's eyes narrowed. "Then what? Then what does it show them?" Aisha's hand trembled in his. But it was Anaik who answered. "Ours." Before Northern could process that, before he could begin to unpack what that single word meant, what it implied about these peaceful, serene women, the temperature plummeted. His breath misted in front of his face, crystallizing in the suddenly frigid air. Around the hall, golden wings began to glow, not with warm light, but with something cold and sharp, the kind of light that cut rather than illuminated. Northern recognized that quality. He'd seen it before, in places where violence had become so concentrated it took on physical properties. Outside, a sound began to build, low at first, then rising. Screaming. Not human screaming. Something worse. The ascending waterfalls, Northern could hear them changing. The gentle rush of upward-flowing water was becoming a roar, a thunderous cacophony that shouldn't have been possible from water defying gravity. The mist that had parted so peacefully for him earlier was thickening, and through the windows he could see it. It was turning red. Anaik's expression remained serene, but her voice carried an edge now. The kind of edge that suggested the serenity was a choice, not a limitation. "The night reveals truth. During the day we are peaceful. We are kind. We reflect only what violence is brought to us." The screaming outside grew louder. Northern stood slowly, his combat instincts screaming warnings his conscious mind was still processing. Around him, every Seraphy was rising, shields appearing on their arms like they'd always been there, wings spreading to their full terrible glory. Even Nessa had stopped laughing. "But at night," Anaik continued, walking toward the massive doors of the hall with measured steps, "we do not reflect what comes to us." The doors flew open. Beyond them, the mist had become a churning mass of crimson fog, and within it, Northern could see shapes. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Forms made of red mist and golden light, twisted and screaming, fighting each other in an eternal, horrific dance. The movement was frenzied, chaotic, but with a terrible repetition. The same strikes, the same deaths, over and over in an endless loop of violence. "At night," Anaik said softly, "we reflect what we have taken." Northern's Shingon activated involuntarily, drawn by the sheer, concentrated essence of the scene before him, and he saw them clearly. Every person who had ever attacked the sanctum with killing intent. Every warrior who had entered the mist seeking to harm the Seraphy. Every murderer, every conqueror, every fool who thought pacifists were weak and mistook patience for powerlessness. They were all there, still fighting, still dying, still experiencing their own violence in an endless loop, trapped in the moment of their transgression like insects in amber. Every single night, for eternity, Northern felt something cold settle in his chest. Oh, the mist didn't just turn attackers away. It didn't just make them forget. It didn't even just kill them and be done with it. Kept them. Aisha's voice was hollow beside him, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Northern heard something in her tone that matched the woman she must have been before he was born. Before peace became performance. "We are pacifists, child of prophecy. We do not seek violence. We do not strike first. We endure all things with patience and grace." The red mist pressed against the hall like a living thing, and within it, faces pressed against invisible barriers, faces twisted in eternal agony, mouths open in soundless screams that would never end. "But we never said," Anaik continued, her amber eyes reflecting the crimson horror outside, "that we forgave." Northern understood now. This was the cost of attacking paradise. This was what happened when you brought violence to those who had forsworn it but never forgotten how to wield it. The Seraphim didn't fight back. They didn't need to. They just kept you. Forever. Anike turned back to the hall, her small smile unchanged. Welcome to the long night, child. I hope you're hungry. Dinner will last until dawn. After all. She gestured to the nightmare beyond the doors, to the sea of tortured souls experiencing violence without the mercy of death. We wouldn't want to go outside. Northern stared at the churning mass of red mist, at the women with golden wings standing calmly beside him, at his mother's peaceful expression that now seemed less like tranquility and more like restraint. And for the first time since arriving at this place, he understood. This is what they feared. Not the warriors. Not the defensive capabilities. Not even the mist itself. What truly made this place infamous wasn't its defenses. It was its memory. The Seraphim didn't forget. They didn't forgive. They simply endured and collected. Every act of violence against them became eternal punishment, reflected back with the patient cruelty of those who had all the time in the world. This was what mercy looked like when it ran out. And the night, the long, terrible night, had only just begun. All these things were unsettling in a strange way. Northern didn't know whether to call this place a blessing or a curse. However, hearing all of this was leaving a very bad taste in his mouth. Not because he suddenly cared for all the people who had approached the Velithians with violence. Their choices had consequences, after all. The general idea of such cruelty was bitter to swallow. But also, Alistran and that elf were there too. They most definitely harbored harm in their hearts. Alistran was shady, and maybe this was deserving, maybe it wasn't. Northern didn't particularly care about philosophical debates on justice right now. What he cared about was simple. He didn't want to leave their fate in the hands of some damn mist. My judgment. Not yours. Not nature's. Not anybody else's. He turned his gaze to Anike. His mother seemed to read the look in his eyes and held his hand even tighter, her grip almost desperate. Northern paid no attention to it. Instead, he gave Anike a cold look, the kind of look that had preceded a lot of very bad decisions from other people's perspectives. Anike still wore that gentle smile, nothing about her expression wavering despite the charging tension in the air, like she was watching a child throw a tantrum over bedtime. Northern straightened. He looked away for a moment and shook his head slightly, almost amused. Almost. I'm sorry. I can't allow it. Anike smiled still. Child of prophecy, you seem to not understand. This is not something we have control over. It is not a monster, this is merely a result of nature. Do you intend to fight nature? Northern silently shifted his gaze to the drifting crimson mist beyond the windows, watching it pulse and writhe like something alive. Nature, right? Because that makes it better. I've been strong for a long time, he said quietly. But my strength has never been able to solve my problems. Somehow it was as if some irresponsible being just decided that before I had the chance to demonstrate my strength. The odds were already terrifyingly stacked against me. He paused, focus drilling into the mist like he could burn it away through sheer willpower. What I'm saying is, my strength has never been enough, even though it's been plenty. Then he looked at Anike, and his eyes were colder than the mist outside. Anike, you don't understand. It doesn't matter whether it's nature or a monster, you or my father, the constellations or the gods themselves. My will is my will, and I intend to use every ounce of my power to back it. He pointed toward the red mist. There are people in that place whose judgment only I should pass. Not some mist. Not you. Not your reflected violence or your constellation's design. Me. His hand dropped. If destroying the mist is the only way to retrieve them, then say your goodbyes, Anike. She smiled at Northern, unbothered, serene as still water. You cannot destroy the mist. Northern laughed shortly, just a huff of air. Really? Oh, watch me. Northern stepped away from his seat. However, as he did, all of them rose as well. Every Seraphim in the hall. They glared at him with cold golden glows kindling in their eyes, manifested their bucklers in flashes of light, and faced him with battle-hardened expressions that suggested this wasn't their first time dealing with arrogant outsiders. Northern looked at them, looked back at Anike. raised his brows. Really? The lady's tone remained gentle and kind, like she was explaining basic arithmetic to a slow student. This is for your own good, child of prophecy. Let not your arrogance lead you to your death. You cannot destroy the design of the constellations. This is nature. It is beyond you, beyond any human. Northern shook his head, almost pitifully. Here I was thinking you knew me. He met her eyes. Apparently, you don't know me at all. Northern's expression didn't change. He simply stood there, looking at the wall of golden-winged women with their shields raised, their eyes glowing with that cold, ancient light, waiting, assessing. Then he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Let me explain something to you, Northern said softly, his voice carrying that conversational tone he used when he was about to thoroughly dismantle someone's worldview. You're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. You think this is a negotiation. You think your numbers matter, your blessings, your reflected violence. He tilted his head slightly. You think any of that matters right now. His eyes began to glow, not golden like theirs, but sea blue with deep black concentric circles rippling outward like disturbed water. Shingon activated. All 3 layers at once. Northern saw everything. The structure of their souls laid bare, essence flowing through them like luminous blood. The invisible threads of constellation power binding them to the lumisphere, taut and gleaming. He saw the pathways their abilities would take, the exact microsecond they'd activate their defensive techniques, the precise angle their shields would catch incoming force. He saw 15 different futures where they tried to stop him. In all of them, they failed. Predictable. They're all the same. Trained the same way, blessed the same way, thinking the same way. You think I need to strike you to get past you? Northern continued, taking one measured step forward. The marble floor didn't make a sound beneath his boot. You're wrong. I don't need to touch you at all. The temperature dropped further, but this time it wasn't from the mist outside. It was from Northern. His essence began to manifest not as visible aura, but as presence. Raw, oppressive. The weight of every form he'd copied, every monster he'd killed, every impossible situation he'd survived pressed down on the hall like gravity itself had chosen a favorite. The air grew thick, hard to breathe, as if the space between molecules had suddenly remembered they could refuse to cooperate. Sale stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Even the Seraphi hesitated, their perfect formation wavering. Northern, please. Aisha started, her voice tight with worry. Mom, stay out of this. His voice wasn't angry, wasn't cruel, wasn't even particularly loud. It was simply final. Northern raised his hand, fingers spread like he was grasping at reality itself. And reality bent. You're using one's true self, limitless one. He existed in multiple states simultaneously. There was Northern standing in the hall, hand outstretched. There was Northern already at the door, palm pressed against the wood. There was Northern behind Anike, having crossed 20 meters of space in no time at all. There was Northern in 7 different positions around the room, each one as solid and real as the others, each one's eyes glowing with that same cold calculation. The Seraphi spun, shields raised in practiced unison, but they didn't know which one to face. Their mirror abilities required a target, required violence to be directed at them first. How do you reflect an attack from someone who exists everywhere at once? Impossible. One of them whispered, her voice barely audible. Northern, all of him, spoke simultaneously, his voice layering over itself in a dissonant harmony that shouldn't have been physically possible. I have 10 own talents, each with multiple abilities. I can transform into thousands of forms. I can summon armies of defeated enemies as loyal echoes. I can see every possible future of this conversation. He paused, and all 8 versions of him smiled the same cold, measured smile. And right now, in every single timeline I can perceive, and believe me, I'm perceiving a lot of them, you don't stop me. You don't even slow me down. His voices unified into one, coming from all directions at once. So please, for your own sake, don't make me prove it. Oriel, a tall, powerfully built Seraphy with scars crossing her knuckles, stepped forward, her gold pupilless eyes burning with something between rage and recognition, like she'd seen this kind of arrogance before and watched it bleed out on the marble. You think you're special? You think your power makes you? You're using Oblivion's mark? Absolute lock. Oriel's voice cut off mid-sentence, the words dying in her throat. She was still moving, still breathing, still conscious, eyes wide with sudden understanding. But her talent, every single ability, every blessing, every fragment of constellation-given power she possessed, was sealed. Completely, instantly, irreversibly if he chose. She clutched at her chest, gasping, feeling the sudden void where her strength had been a moment ago. Her wings flickered like dying embers, losing their luminous glow. The buckler in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and she couldn't remember how she'd ever lifted it before. Northern looked at her with something like pity. That's absolute lock. I can seal any ability, any power, any function. Physical, magical, conceptual. Doesn't matter. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a particularly interesting specimen. Permanently, if I choose. Right now, you're as powerless as any normal human who's never seen a rift in their life. He paused. How does it feel? Oriel fell to her knees, her shield clattering against the marble floor with a sound like a death knell. The other Seraphy stared in horror, frozen between fight and flight. I'll release it in a moment, Northern said casually, like he was discussing the weather. I'm making a point, not an enemy. Well, not unless you force my hand. He gestured vaguely at Oriel's crumpled form. The point is, your mirror abilities only work if I attack you with intent to harm. But what if I simply remove your ability to fight back? What if I don't fight you at all? I just make you irrelevant. He snapped his fingers. The sound cracked through the hall like breaking glass. Oriel gasped as her power flooded back, constellation light surging through her veins. She stayed on her knees, shaking, wings trembling as they reignited. Her hands pressed against the cold floor, and she couldn't quite bring herself to stand. She'll remember that feeling. They all will. Northern turned to Anike, and now all 8 versions of him began to converge, collapsing back into a single form through some impossible geometry that made the eye hurt to follow. He stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could see her reflection in those strange, ringed eyes. You said I can't destroy the design of the constellations. You said this is nature beyond humans. His Shingon focused on her, all 3 layers peeling back reality like layers of an onion. And even Anike, ancient and blessed and unshakable, flinched under the weight of his gaze. It was like being seen by something that shouldn't exist. I am not, Northern said softly, each word deliberate. A human. Not anymore. He glanced away, almost thoughtful. I stopped being that about 3 days ago. Actually, no, I stopped being human the moment I refused to be weak ever again. I stopped being that the moment I decided my will matters more than the universe's opinion of what's possible. He gestured toward the red mist beyond the doors, still churning and writhing. So here's what's going to happen. His voice was calm, patient, explaining basic facts. I'm going to walk out there. I'm going to enter that mist. And I'm going to take back what's mine. Because Alistran and that elf belong to my judgment. Not yours, not the constellations, and certainly not some glorified fogs. His eyes hardened. If you try to stop me, I will go through you. Not over you. Not around you. Through you. He let that sink in. I'll seal your talents one by one. I'll copy your forms and use them better than you ever could. I'll summon echoes of every enemy I've ever defeated and turn them against you until you can't tell which direction the attack is coming from. I'll make you understand, really truly understand, exactly how outmatched you are. His expression softened slightly, almost sympathetic. Or, and this is the option I'm genuinely hoping you choose, you can sit down, finish your dinner, and watch me do something you've spent hundreds of years thinking was impossible. Silence. There was complete, absolute silence. Even the screaming from the mist seemed to fade at that moment. Judgment stepped forward, that strange, impossible-to-remember figure. When she spoke, her voice was layered, as if multiple entities were speaking through one throat, each word carrying weight that pressed against Northern's eardrums. You would challenge the will of Elphok? The design of the constellation of awakening. Northern met her gaze without flinching. Here we go. If Elphok wanted to stop me, they should have done it themselves instead of hiding behind automated defense systems and well-meaning pacifists. He turned toward the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a nature to fight. Northern stepped through the doorway. The red mist surged toward him like a living thing, sensing violence in his soul, ready to trap him in his own worst moment, to make him another eternal prisoner screaming into the void for eternity. How dramatic! It touched his skin. And stopped. Name mastery. Unnaming level 1. Analyzing mist. This may take a minute, and I suggest you enter into the mist for a more accurate result. Northern sighed and walked into the mist. Of course it needs more data. Why make things simple? The moment he crossed the threshold completely, the world changed. The temperature didn't just drop, it inverted. Heat became cold, became something else entirely. Something that existed outside normal sensation, like his nerve endings couldn't decide which lie to tell his brain. The screaming that had seemed distant before was now inside his head, reverberating through his skull like his own thoughts had turned against him. Each scream had texture. Wait, they pressed against the inside of his head like physical objects trying to claw their way out. And then he saw it. Himself. Not a reflection. Not an illusion. At least it didn't seem like one. Northern's perception of this other Northern was perfectly, unervingly real, solid flesh, breathing, present. This wasn't some magical projection. The other Northern stood 10 meters away, and he was smiling. It was the smile he'd worn when he tortured Cryos. The smile that said he was enjoying this, that the violence wasn't just necessary, it was satisfying. "Hello," the other Northern said. His voice was Northern's voice, but stripped of all pretense. No casual tone. No conversational deflection. Just honest, cold amusement. Finally. No more performance. No more, I didn't want this bullshit. Northern's hand went to where his weapons would be, but they weren't there. The soul forge felt distant, muffled, like trying to reach through thick glass. Great. Warning. Mist is suppressing active abilities. Analyzing structure. Estimated time. 47 seconds. Northern kept his expression neutral. 47 seconds. I can handle 47 seconds. The other Northern laughed. A sound without warmth. You're already calculating. Already strategizing. You think this is a fight you can win through tactics. He tilted his head, and the gesture was so familiar it made Northern's skin crawl. I am you. I know every thought before you think it. Every plan before you make it. He stepped forward, and Northern noticed he was carrying something. Cryos' head. Spinning it. Casual. Like a toy. Remember this? Remember how good it felt? The sadism, the control, the pure satisfaction of reducing a threat to a screaming wreck. The other Northern's smile widened. You told yourself it was justified. That he threatened your family. That he earned it. He did earn it. The words came out flat. Matter of fact. Oh, I agree. The other Northern smile didn't waver. But here's the question you don't want to answer. Would you have done it even if he hadn't threatened them? If he'd just been annoying? Inconvenient? In your way? Northern said nothing. I don't have to answer that. I mean, look at Ulzard, your first ever and only student. Or Rizel, your first ever teacher. Somehow, Northern, people that dare come close to you always wind up dead. And you always have to play the victim. Even when you're the one that killed them. Northern's gaze darkened. Something cold settling in his chest. Doesn't confronting my violence usually mean you throw my abilities back at me? And we circle around in some poetic combat? The other Northern laughed. Hell no. You know I'm wiser than that, Northern. There's more than one way to break a person like you. Of course there is. The mist churned around them, and more figures began to emerge. Every person he'd killed, every monster he'd destroyed, every threat he'd eliminated with overwhelming, often excessive force. They circled him like witnesses at a trial, or executioners at a sentencing. Northern recognized faces in the crowd. Some had names. Most didn't. All had one thing in common. They'd gotten in his way. "You keep pretending you're reluctant," the other Northern continued, tossing Cryos' head aside carelessly. It rolled across the ground, still wearing that frozen expression of agony. "That you don't want to be involved. That you're forced into these situations. But we both know the truth, don't we?" He leaned in close, and his eyes, Northern's own eyes, held nothing but dark recognition. "You like being powerful. You like overwhelming your enemies. You like the look in their eyes when they realize they've fucked with the wrong person. You like being the necessary evil. You like the fear, the dominance, the absolute certainty that you can destroy anything that irritates you." Northern felt something cold spreading through his chest. Not because the words were lies, but because even he didn't know if they were. 47 seconds is taking a very long time. Analysis. 32 seconds remaining. "You're not a hero," the other Northern said softly, almost gently. "You're not even an anti-hero. You're just a person who got hurt once, decided never to be weak again, and now you're so overwhelmingly strong that you've lost all sense of proportion." The figures around them began to move closer, their footsteps silent on the mist-covered ground. Northern recognized some of them. The White Walker whose name he'd taken without mercy. Sura's counterpart. The people he'd massacred in Sloria, many of them scorched beyond recognition. The monsters he'd slain on the streets of Lothelluin. Some still had burn marks. Some were missing limbs. All were watching him with empty eyes. "You spin Cryos' head like it's a dramatic effect," the other Northern continued, his voice conversational, friendly even. "You explain what you're doing while you torture people because it makes you feel clever. You maintain that cool, conversational tone while committing acts of violence that would make warlords uncomfortable." He grabbed Northern by the collar, and his grip was iron. Real, physical, solid. "And the worst part? The part you really don't want to admit," the other Northern leaned in until they were nose to nose, "is that you're not conflicted about it anymore. You haven't been for a long time. The mask is habit. The reluctance is nostalgia. But the truth, the real truth, is that you've accepted what you are." Northern stared into his own eyes, into that cold recognition. "And what am I?" The other Northern smiled. "A weapon that learned to think. A monster that learned to talk. A creature of violence that's just barely convinced itself it has a conscience." Analysis. 15 seconds remaining. The figures rushed forward. Northern tried to summon his forms, his echoes, anything. But the mist suppressed everything. He was just him, just flesh, just the person underneath all the power. And they hit him, not with fists, not with weapons, with truth. Each blow was a memory. Each strike carried the weight of what he'd become. The satisfaction of his first death, Death Angel, had mattered at the time. It felt necessary, like he was saving himself from the monster. Noble, even. But looking back now, Northern couldn't shake the suspicion that he'd manipulated himself into feeling that way. Made it easier to sleep at night, probably. Actually, not a suspicion. He had done exactly that. The dark pleasure that came afterward, though? That was harder to justify. The way he watched monsters, and yes, humans too, burning in black flame. The satisfaction was real. Addictive, even. With Black Lance, the pleasure turned macabre, twisted into something he couldn't quite name but recognized all the same. You enjoyed it. Just admit it. Each death resurfaced now in agonizing clarity, the mist showing him what he'd refused to see. They had been the victims, not him. They had suffered, not him. He wielded all the power yet acted victimized, as if anyone could actually threaten him, as if he'd ever truly been close to death. Had he? Really? The memories forced him to confront something he'd never said aloud. There had been a moment, a specific crystalline moment when he realized his power meant he never had to compromise again. Not with anyone. Not about anything. The times he'd thought, I could kill everyone in this room if I wanted to, and felt not horror at the idea, but curiosity. Clinical interest in whether he'd actually do it. How easy it would be. Every time he'd chosen overwhelming force when lesser force would have worked. Not because it was necessary, but because it was easier. More definitive. Because he could. Northern fell to his knees. The other Northern, his reflection, his truth, his accusation, crouched beside him. You came here to save Alistran because you don't want anyone else to judge him, the reflection whispered. But the real reason? You don't trust anyone else to be as ruthless as you are when it matters. You want to keep him for yourself because you know that when the time comes, you'll do what needs to be done without hesitation, without mercy, without the weakness of compassion getting in the way. Analysis. 3 seconds remaining. You're not fighting for justice. The other Northern's voice was soft, almost pitying. You're fighting for control. Because being weak once was so traumatic that you've built an entire personality around never, ever being vulnerable again, even if that means becoming something that should terrify you. Northern looked up at his own face, then laughed. He laughed for a while, the sound echoing strangely in the mist. Not hysterical, just tired, and maybe a little bitter. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. You're wrong. The other Northern blinked. You have no idea. Northern continued, still on his knees but his eyes hardening. Though you almost had me there for a second. Perhaps I've deluded myself at some point. Made things easier to live with. But I never lied to myself. Not about the important things, at least. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Victimized myself? That sounds pathetic. Weak. A short laugh. But here's the thing, I am pathetic. Pathetic as hell. So pathetic that even with all this power committed into my hands, I still flunk it uselessly. So pathetic that I still stoop to crude methods despite having better options available. I fight with surface comfort, never truly exploring what I'm capable of. Laziness. Pure laziness. Laziness has consumed every fragment of me. But look here, fake. I never stopped trying to survive. And look at where that's gotten me. He stood slowly, joints protesting. I know that I'm not a good person, at least not in the way stories define good. His voice grew steadier with each word. I know that my conscience is convenient, that my morality is selective, that my restraint is a choice I could stop making at any moment. The other Northern smile began to fade. I know, Northern said, stronger now, that I'm one bad day away from becoming exactly what you're accusing me of being, that the line between protective and monstrous is thinner than I want to admit, that it would be so easy, so terrifyingly easy. Analysis complete. Mist structure mapped. Ready for unnaming. Northern looked at his reflection, his supposed truth, his darkest possibility, and smiled. But it wasn't the cold smile, wasn't the cruel one. It was something more honest, more real. But you know what the difference is? He asked quietly. Between accepting what I am and becoming a monster? The other Northern said nothing. I choose, Northern said simply. Every day, every fight, every moment someone irritates me or threatens me or gets in my way, I choose not to kill them just because I can. I choose to let people live who don't deserve death, or who maybe do deserve it, but killing them would be convenient rather than necessary. Choice. That's all it ever comes down to. I choose to protect people I don't have to protect. He stepped forward. The other Northern, his darkest self, his potential future, took a step back. You're right about one thing, though. Northern's voice dropped. I'm a weapon that learned to think. A creature of violence that learned to talk. But you're wrong about the important part. Northern reached out and grabbed his own reflection by the throat. I haven't just barely convinced myself I have a conscience. I've decided to have one. Despite everything. Despite the power. Despite how easy it would be to just stop pretending. Stop choosing. His grip tightened. And that decision? It matters. Because I went from that boy who had to survive on chances, on luck and desperation and whatever scraps the world through his way, to this. To someone who creates the chances. I gained the power of choice. The other Northern began to dissolve. Not in pain but in something that looked almost like understanding. And do you know the thing about choices? Northern's voice softened. They're stronger than nature. Stronger than instinct. Stronger than what you are. He paused, making sure the reflection heard this part. I know what I'm capable of. I've seen it. I've been it. And every single day, I wake up and decide not to become that completely. Not because I'm forced to. Not because I'm weak. But because I choose something harder than violence. The reflection smiled, genuinely this time. Good answer. It vanished. The mist around him began to clarify, its structure suddenly visible. Northern could see it now. The constellation threads woven through everything, the essence bindings, the accumulated weight of 8 centuries of violence reflected and stored and amplified. So that's how you work. Name mastery. Unnaming level 1. You are the Crimson Veil, Northern said, his voice carrying through the dissolving nightmare. The eternal prison. The mirror of sin. You have names, names given by those who fear you. Names that give you power, definition, purpose. His hand began to glow with dark light. But you're not nature. You're not divine will. He reached toward the essence of the mist itself. You're just pain, accumulated and reflected until it became self-sustaining. Just violence that forgot how to stop. Northern's fingers touched something that shouldn't exist, the conceptual foundation of the phenomenon itself. I remove your names. I remove your purpose. I remove your right to exist. The mist shuddered. For 800 years it had been something. A phenomenon. A defense mechanism. A punishment system. An inevitability. Northern erased that identity. Not with force. With understanding. You were trauma made manifest, he said calmly as the red began to fade from existence. But trauma doesn't get to be eternal. Pain doesn't get to be immortal. And violence, even reflected, even justified, even systematic, doesn't get to last forever. The trapped souls began to fade, not destroyed, but released. Finally, mercifully allowed to end. Rest. You've earned it. Then he found them. Alistran and the elf, both frozen mid-scream, locked in whatever private hells the mist had crafted for them. Oblivion's mark. Absolute lock release. Their prisons shattered like glass. They collapsed immediately, gasping, shaking, alive, free. Everything ends, Northern said softly, more to himself than to them. Even eternal punishment. Even divine design. Even the consequences of 800 years of collected violence. He looked at his hands, the hands that could destroy, that had destroyed, that would inevitably destroy again when the situation demanded it. These hands. These cursed, useful hands. But it ends because I choose to end it. His voice was barely a whisper now. Not because I'm strong enough to ignore the rules. Because I'm willing to face what I am and choose to be better anyway. The mist was almost gone now, dissolving into nothing like morning fog under sunlight. Northern turned back toward the hall, carrying Alistran over one shoulder, the elf tucked under his other arm. Neither was in any condition to walk. You're welcome, by the way. Behind him, the crimson veil dissolved into absolute nothing, not with thunder or fire or the dramatic fanfare such phenomena usually demanded. Just the quiet dignity of something that had finally, after 8 centuries, been allowed to rest. Northern stepped back through the doorway. The first thing everyone noticed was the silence. The screaming had stopped. The churning red mist. 800 years of accumulated violence, of divine punishment, of constellation-blessed judgment, was simply gone. Through the massive doorway, they could see clean mist rising peacefully from the ascending waterfalls. Golden light from the setting sun filtering through. Normal sky doing normal sky things. No crimson. No tortured souls. No eternal prison. Nothing. Well, that's going to be a problem. Northern walked to the nearest chair, deposited a listron and the elf with about as much ceremony as one might drop off laundry, and sat down heavily. He looked exhausted, not physically, but in the way someone looks after having an argument with themselves and losing. Or winning. Hard to tell which was worse, honestly. "So," he said into the absolute silence, as if the last few minutes hadn't just redefined several fundamental assumptions about reality. About those seconds on the fish. Nobody moved. Sale's mouth was hanging open in a way that would have been comedic if his face weren't so pale. His hands had gone to his weapons, some automatic defensive reflex, but now they just hovered there uselessly, as if he'd forgotten what they were for, or what weapons were, or what hands were, for that matter. The twins, Mira and Kira, had frozen mid-movement, both reaching for their shields in perfect synchronization. Now they just stood there like matched statues, their synchronized existence temporarily short-circuited by incomprehension. Nessa's perpetual smile had vanished entirely. She was staring at Northern with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching mountains walk or stars fall, the sort of look that said her understanding of how the world worked had just taken significant damage. Even Oriel, who'd spent her entire life holding back violence, who lived on the edge of breaking her vow every single day, looked shaken. Her gold pupilless eyes were wide, and for once the barely restrained rage in her face had been replaced by something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. But it was Judgment who broke first. "What the actual?" She caught herself, jaw clenching so hard Northern could hear her teeth grind. How did you? That's not." Words failed her completely. Judgment, who never struggled for words, was reduced to stammering fragments and half-finished accusations. She looked at Anike desperately, as if the elder could explain what they just witnessed, as if there was an explanation that would make sense, as if sense was still something that applied to the current situation. Anike's face had gone completely blank. Not serene, not peaceful. Blank in the way a slate goes blank when everything written on it has been erased, violently, thoroughly, and without permission. Her small smile was gone. For the first time since Northern had met her, she looked genuinely shocked. The unflappable elder, shaken. That was probably not a good sign. Then again, Northern was starting to suspect he'd passed good signs several catastrophes ago. "The veil," she whispered. Her voice, usually so gentle and controlled, cracked slightly around the edges. "The Crimson Veil. 800 years. 800 years of El Fox blessing, of accumulated divine judgment, of constellation-woven punishment." She trailed off, looking at Northern like he'd just casually mentioned he'd swallowed the sun, or stepped on a god, or filed the cosmos under minor inconvenience. "It's gone," Aisha said. Northern's mother had one hand over her mouth, and there were tears streaming down her face, though whether from shock or relief or some complicated mixture of both, Northern couldn't tell. The long night, the eternal prison, all of it, just gone. He walked in. One of the Seraphi whispered from somewhere in the back, voice trembling. He walked into the Crimson Veil. Nobody survives the Crimson Veil. Nobody survives because nobody comes back out. Another voice corrected shakily. They get trapped. Forever. That's the entire point of the veil. He came back out, a third voice said, sounding almost accusatory, as if Northern had cheated somehow, as if he'd violated some fundamental rule of reality and now they all had to deal with the paperwork. He came back out carrying people. He saved them from eternal punishment. He didn't save them from eternal punishment, Judgment finally managed, her voice hoarse and raw. She was still staring at Northern like he was a ghost. Or something worse than a ghost. Something that shouldn't exist but did anyway, just to make everyone uncomfortable. He ended eternal punishment. Do you understand the difference? Do you understand what that means? I'm starting to get a pretty good idea, actually, and I really don't like where this is heading. The hall erupted into whispers. Not loud. Seraphi apparently whispered even in shock, but urgent, confused, bordering on panicked. The veil was constellation-blessed. 8 centuries of divine protection. Supposed to be permanent. Not even a luminary could. What kind of soul rank does he have to? He's not even transcendent yet. I can feel his essence, he's... Anike raised one trembling hand, and the hall fell silent again. The whispers died like candles in a windstorm. She looked at Northern for a long moment. Her eyes held something Northern had never seen there before. Not quite fear, not quite awe, but something uncomfortably close to both. Then, slowly, so slowly it seemed to take forever, she lowered herself to one knee. "Oh no," Northern said immediately, sitting up straighter. "No, we're not doing this." But it was too late. Around the hall, every single Seraphi dropped to one knee. The Arethemine followed. Then the servants, the scholars, even the visitors who'd just come for dinner and gotten significantly more than they'd bargained for. A merchant in silk robes, two younger Seraphi who looked like students, an elderly couple who'd probably been hoping for pleasant conversation and maybe some wine. All kneeling and staring at him. Crap. Northern felt his face heat. This was not, he didn't want. What is this? What are they doing? Stop it. The sound of fabric rustling filled the hall as hundreds of people settled into positions of reverence. Knees hitting stone. Wings folding respectfully. Heads bowing. For him, Sale looked around wildly, saw everyone kneeling, and, despite his confusion, dropped to one knee as well. Some habits ran deep. Only Aisha remained standing, though her hand was still pressed over her mouth and tears continued their silent descent down her cheeks. "Reincarnation of the constellation," Anike said, her voice thick with something between awe and reverence. El-Fak returned, the awakener made flesh. "We are honored beyond." "I'm going to stop you right there," Northern interrupted, his voice flat as stone. "I'm not a reincarnation of anything. I'm not El-Fak. I'm not divine. I'm not whatever mystical explanation you're currently constructing in your head to make sense of what just happened. You destroyed a constellation-blessed phenomenon," Judgment said. She was still kneeling, but her tone had shifted from reverent to almost challenging, like she was daring him to deny what she'd witnessed with her own eyes. "You walked into divine punishment and walked back out. You unmade 800 years of accumulated spiritual architecture. That's not... Humans can't." "Humans can't," Northern agreed. "I'm not human." He paused. "Damn, I'm getting way too comfortable saying that. I'm not human, but I'm also not whatever it is you're all thinking I am." He stood up. The movement made several people flinch. "Great. Now they think I'm going to smite them or something. Look, I understand this is shocking. I understand it breaks your worldview. I understand you've spent centuries believing the Crimson Veil was permanent, immutable, beyond mortal interference." He gestured vaguely at the now clear night outside, where stars actually shone instead of bleeding crimson. "But here's the thing about permanence. It's usually just a failure of imagination combined with insufficient force." "Insufficient force," Anike repeated numbly. Her eyes hadn't blinked in at least 30 seconds. "He calls destroying a constellation's divine judgment sufficient force." "I didn't destroy it through force," Northern corrected, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I destroyed it through understanding. The force was just applied understanding. There's a difference." "There is not a difference," Judgment said. She was standing now, though she swayed slightly on her feet. "That's the same thing. That's what the constellations do. They understand the fundamental nature of reality because they exist in its early stages, and they apply force to reshape it. You just described divine action." Northern felt a headache building behind his eyes. This was getting out of hand. "I'm not a constellation. I'm not even particularly special by the standards of where I'm trying to get." He looked around the hall at all the odd, reverent faces, like he'd just parted the seas instead of fixing what was essentially a very complicated magical mistake. "I'm just someone who got tired of being told what's impossible and decided to check for myself. I'm just a demon, okay?" "The Crimson Veil was impossible to destroy," one of the Seraphi said. She sounded almost angry about it, as if Northern had personally offended her by succeeding where everyone else had failed. "We tried. For 800 years, Every luminary, every paragon, every sage tried to find a way to end the long night, to free the trapped souls, to stop the eternal punishment. And none of you could, Northern said. Not cruelly, just stating fact. None of us could, Anike confirmed. Her voice had steadied slightly, though she was still staring at Northern like he'd grown a second head. Or maybe like she was trying to see through him to whatever divine essence she was convinced lurked underneath. Because it was woven into the fundamental structure of this place. Elphok's blessing and the Crimson Veil were two sides of the same coin. To destroy one would be to destroy the other, and without Elphok's blessing. The sanctum falls, Northern finished. The islands crash into the ocean. The pacifist protection fails. Everything you've built for 8 centuries ends in about 30 seconds of very expensive real estate plummeting to its death. Anike nodded slowly. So we learned to live with it. The long night, the trapped souls. The knowledge that our mercy had a dark reflection we couldn't erase. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling faintly. We accepted it as the price of our survival. You accepted it because you couldn't change it, Northern corrected, and his tone was gentler than his words. There's a difference between philosophical acceptance and pragmatic surrender. You told yourselves it was necessary because the alternative was admitting you were trapped by your own blessing. The words hung in the air like smoke. Several Seraphi looked away uncomfortably. And yet, Judgment said quietly, you changed it. The blessing remains. I can feel it. The lumisphere of the rising fall is unchanged. Elphok's power still flows through this place like water through stone. But the Crimson Veil is gone. You separated what we believed was inseparable. Because they weren't actually connected, Northern said, sitting back down with the weight of someone who'd just run a marathon. They just grew together over time until everyone assumed they were the same thing. The veil wasn't part of Elphok's blessing. It was a consequence of how you used that blessing. 800 years of reflected violence accumulated until it became self-sustaining. A side effect that everyone mistook for divine intention. He suddenly looked very tired again. Explaining the difference between correlation and causation to people who think I'm a god. This is my life now. I just removed the side effect, unnamed it, told reality it didn't have to exist anymore, and reality agreed. Simple. Simple, Sale repeated faintly. He calls it simple. The child of prophecy, Anike breathed. She was still on one knee, and now Northern noticed that her hands weren't just trembling. They were shaking like leaves in a storm. The one foretold to reshape the balance, to break the chains of the old order. I thought it would be metaphorical, political, a shift in power structures and ideology. Not literal destruction of divine phenomena, Judgment finished. She laughed. A short, sharp sound that was almost hysterical, like her brain was trying to process something it fundamentally couldn't fit into any existing category. Not a man who walks into constellation-blessed eternal punishment and just decides it doesn't get to exist anymore. I'm 17, or at least almost, Northern said. Not really a man. Then again, I guess I can say I am a man. Technically, whatever.